Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Dark Aether Files podcast. I'm Special Agent Spooky Clutter, and today I have a special presentation for you. So, to give some context, last year we were a part of a really cool review series called the HalloScream Review Series. It was hosted by Good Real Hunting and featured several prominent creators in our little circle. And being that it's Halloween time, I figured, well, it's the 1 year anniversary of the HalloScream Review Series. Michael Myers is still popular. I figured, what the hell? Why not do the HalloScream Review Series for those newcomers to the channel who may have not seen our reviews? So I present to you the entirety of the HalloScream Review Series, starting with our first video, which was the night before All Hallows Scream, little Halloween parody sketch that I did. So if you haven't been able to watch the review series or the sketch itself, here you go. And make sure you stay tuned to the end, because there's a little something special coming up on the channel fairly soon. So with that all being said, I hope you enjoy the HalloScream Review Series, and until next time, ladies and gentlemen, remember that the entertainment is out there.
You may think they scare me, you're probably right. Black cats and goblins on Halloween night. Trick or treat!
I'm so excited to do this movie review. It's gonna be the bestest thing ever. I got my snacks, I got my gear, I got my awesome movie memorabilia. It's gonna be a good day. What the Rob Zombie white horse is that? Hey! Hey, Halloween isn't for another couple months, you douche nozzle. You know, with your face so white, your mama was a snowblower. yeah, yeah. I said, your mama was a snowblower. Oh, shh. Oh, crap. Oh, crap, psycho, white guy moves, psycho, white guy moves. Damn Spider-Man. Stay away. You fucking white-faced trash bag douchebag douche nozzle. Holy crap! It's you! You're the Wolverine! Holy crap, I'm a huge fan! My friends are a huge fan of you too! Dude, who's this guy? He's right there, he's trying to kill me, man!
Alright, listen, Bub. This is the part where you get the fuck out and go back to your movie review, friends. I got business to take care of. Fucking Halloween. You're watching the HalloScream Review Series. Keep watching, or you'll end up like this asshole. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Spooky Clutter, and welcome to the first episode of the HalloScream Review Series. Over the next several months, we will be reviewing every Halloween film leading up to Halloween Ends later this fall, and will be concluded with a ranking stream for all the films. Now, for this series, we'll be collaborating with several content creators including Good Real Hunting, Bacon Pew Pew, Mega Movie Z, Jeffman316, Camp Blood Media, Fauci Cinema, and Braden Timmons. You can check out their channels in the description below. So without further delay, let's start with the immortal classic, John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978. When horror fans think of iconic slashers that define the genre, characters like Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger usually come to mind. Of course, most of us never forget the silent masked killer Michael Myers that stalked his way to theaters in 1978's Halloween, Now, while Michael Myers isn't the first slasher killer, you could say he's the one responsible for making the slasher genre as popular as it is today. After this film's release, countless imitators and knockoffs began springing up. This formula of a mass killer racking up a body count is a formula that would define an entire decade of cinema, and is still going strong today. What's most fascinating about this film is that it was a low budget film and being directed by a relatively fresh faced director. Yet, it feels like it was done by a master filmmaker. And John Carpenter has gone down in cinema history as one of the best horror directors, and rightfully so. This film feels genuinely eerie and suspenseful, with the soon to be popular POV shots of the killer looking at his unsuspecting victims and scenes of Michael slowly walking around stalking people. It really does put you in an uneasy mindset. And of course, all of this is magnified by the amazing score by John Carpenter himself. All these elements immerse you in the world that has been crafted here. As we would see in the years to come, John Carpenter has mastered the ability to instill fear and a sense of uneasiness in his films, and have those feelings linger after the film is long over. It's the kind of effect that makes you look behind your back while you're walking or sitting down, or even makes you afraid of the dark. I remember first watching this film about 5 years ago, and this was at a time when I was just getting into horror films. My first proper horror franchise was Friday the 13th, but one of the first horror films I ever watched as a child was John Carpenter's The Fog. So I guess you could say that I came full circle. My first impression of this film was a combination of excitement and uneasiness. So many things about this film fascinated me as I watched it. The film follows Michael Myers from a young boy who murdered his sister to a grown man that carries on his evil practice of murder on Halloween night. Why did he do it? No one knows, and that's one of the biggest strengths of this character. The lack of motive and the fear surrounding that idea makes Michael as an antagonist much more effective. Unlike the cheap Rob Zombie imitation of Michael Myers, which makes me want to dive headfirst into a lion enclosure at the zoo every time I think about it.
Likes cripples.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you!
Most slasher films typically feature a killer with some kind of motive, like revenge or personal gain. We see this with characters like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, where they want to get revenge for some wrong that was done to them or someone they care about. However, with Michael, his motivation is not here. He has no rhyme or reason for killing people, he simply does what he does. Sadly, this feature does change as the series goes along, but we'll get to that later. For me, the idea that someone kills for no reason and that anyone can be chosen at random is more unsettling than a killer with a motive. It's the idea that this situation can happen to anyone that makes this an effective horror film that lingers in your memory as time goes on. The film also does a fantastic job of using elements that makes the audience feel like they're in familiar territory. Having shots of the suburban neighborhoods gives off a sense of relatability for the viewers to connect with. You have a couple houses where some of our protagonists are for a majority of the film. You have the school, and of course the ominous Myers house. A lot of neighborhoods usually have that creepy house in the area where kids could spread rumors and make up ghost stories. It gives off an urban legend vibe that many can relate to. The house where something scary or bad happened it's now condemned, so people begin having ideas like the house is haunted. All of this serves to immerse the audience, and it's very effective. Many horror films, both before and after, utilize this idea. For example, The House in A Nightmare on Elm Street, Camp Crystal Lake and Friday the 13th, and even some classic Universal horror films use this. So John Carpenter knew what tropes and cliches to use in this film. We also have our protagonists, some of whom are the stereotypical high school shitheads commonly found in these slasher films, and some of their dialogue is questionable, with the use of the word totally being used way too often.
It's totally. I'll be totally wiped out.
I don't think you have enough to do tomorrow.
Totally.
Though I think I'd rather hear that than having to sit through 5 minutes of Ghostbusters 2016. But aside from that, you want to root for some of these characters to survive. As they start dying off, we have our final girl Laurie Strode, played by future Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis, that becomes the sole survivor of the killings. And I think it's safe to say that the character of Laurie made the final girl trope as popular as it is, considering many horror films will continue to utilize this formula in the future. A character of Michael Myers is a terrifying and effective villain. One of the reasons is because he doesn't speak, so he gives off this sort of unnerving vibe. He isn't the typical scary monster that goes boo. He's a silent assassin with no emotion or motivation. Of course, other than to kill. And what it helps to sell all of this is Michael's counterpart, Dr. Samuel Loomis, played brilliantly by Donald Pleasance. The scenes of Dr. Loomis explaining Michael Myers to other characters is awesome. This, paired with the creepy music, helps to sell the ominous presence that Michael has on the town of Haddonfield.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
And the dynamic I feel between these two harkens me back to the rivalry of Van Helsing and Dracula in the classic Universal horror films, where you have the hero character that tries to warn everyone of the evil and the monster that's doing all the killing. Once again, you can see that these small features in classic horror help to inspire future generations of filmmakers. Unlike many horror films where the victims go to the evil, this time the evil comes to them. Of course, in those films, the killer was typically a supernatural being, with a few exceptions like Leatherface or Norman Bates. And for most of the film, you think this is the case here with Halloween. We see that Michael feels pain, he makes sounds that would usually identify him as being human. However, at the end of the film, we suddenly have this ominous and stomach-sinking feeling that makes the film even more scary. Let me explain. Throughout the film, we've been under the impression that Michael was an ordinary guy, aside from the fact that he killed his sister and lacked any kind of identifiable human emotion. We have Dr. Loomis explaining that there was nothing inside him, no fear, joy, or sorrow. He was just there. He just was what he was. Loomis says that he has the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes, which sounds very creepy. With that all said, there was nothing to suggest that he was anything more than just a man. At the end of the film, Dr. Loomis saves Laurie by shooting Michael 6 times at point-blank range, and then he falls off the balcony. We see that Michael is lying on the ground, not moving, so we assume he's dead. After all, who could survive 6 point-blank shots and fall off a balcony, right? So Loomis goes to see if Laurie's alright. They have this fitting bit of dialogue about Michael being the boogeyman. And as Loomis goes back to look over the railing, Michael is gone. We have the incredible Halloween main theme play as Loomis looks out, realizing that Michael is still out there, somewhere. And without straight up telling us, we have this understanding, at least on some level, that there is more to Michael than meets the eye. And Dr. Loomis's face says it all. And it's as if he knew that Michael would be gone. What a great way to end a horror film. You think the nightmare is over with the villain dead and our main protagonist surviving their terrifying encounter with evil incarnate, then boom! He's no longer where he was lying, and we get several shots of the different areas we've seen him earlier in the film. This is all accompanied by the sound of Michael breathing in the famous Halloween theme. The mask of Michael Myers, as many of you already know, is shaped off the face of William Shatner. Wow! Who would have thought that Captain Kirk would be the face of a legendary horror icon? Of course, as time goes on, the mask goes through several looks and changes. Man, I swear, it feels like Michael's going through more changes as the series goes along than a college student with a gender studies degree. With that said, the mask of the first film will always be the best for me. It's a simple look that can't be beat. It's also interesting to point out that several people played Michael Myers in this film. For the role of adult Myers, the most well-known performer is Nick Castle. We also have Deborah Hill, who played as the POV shot of young Myers that stabs Judith at the beginning of the film, and Will Sandin as the young Myers. Tony Moran and Tommy Lee Wallace even played Michael during the film. And it's crazy to think that one character had multiple actors play the role in just one film. Of course, you wouldn't know because Michael was wearing a mask most of the time anyway, but regardless, the performances were fantastic and accomplished what it set out to do, which was to scare the piss out of unsuspecting moviegoers. I'd also like to point out that there are some really interesting references to other horror films on Halloween. For example, I'm sure it's no coincidence that the character of Dr. Loomis bears a similar name to the character of Sam Loomis in Psycho. And aside from it most likely being a nice nod to Psycho, it would be cool if these characters were one and the same. Both feature a mentally disturbed killer that goes crazy, and maybe Loomis's experience with Norman Bates inspires him to become a doctor to understand the criminal mind. Throughout the film, we see many characters watching a horror movie marathon on the TV. This type of presentation is similar to things like Mystery Science Theater, Joe Bob Briggs' Monster Vision, and Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. The movie that was playing on there was The Thing from Another World, a film that John Carpenter himself would later remake. All these elements in Halloween just shows the passion that Carpenter had for the genre. For me, this is the best that the Halloween series could offer. It was a simple story with familiar elements and a solid cast. There really wasn't a need for a sequel, but the demand was too high, and this small, low budget horror film became a franchise legacy. Halloween 2. After reviewing all these films in this series so far, I've come to the conclusion that out of all of them, this film was really the only one that had any reason to be made. The first film had left us on one of the best cliffhangers ever put to film, and as I said before, that's really where the series should have ended. The feeling that Michael is still out there somewhere is a chilling thought. But for this film, they did a few things to change up the narrative. First and foremost, this film takes place on the same night, an aspect that future sequels would utilize for their stories. Second, it addressed certain plot points that were left to the audience's imagination in the first film. And depending on your own personal taste of the story of Halloween, this movie will either enhance or take away from your enjoyment. For me, I'm in the middle of these two experiences. On the one hand, getting a sequel to one of my favorite horror films sounds exciting because the fun can continue. At the same time, the sequel will most likely address some mysteries presented in the original that were left up to the imagination, and explaining it could lessen my enjoyment of the first story, which it sort of does. And aside from my own personal thoughts on what Halloween 2 does to the story, it is a decent film. It follows many of the same beats of the original, and it doesn't feel completely disconnected from it. Each of the characters that survived the first movie fit right back into their respective roles. And seeing Dr. Loomis continuing his crusade to hunt down Michael is as entertaining as ever. The only one I would say feels the weakest is Laurie herself. She spends most of the movie in the hospital and doesn't have much dialogue. But on the upside, Dr. Loomis is given much more focus. Michael Myers is a mixed bag for me in this one. First off, seeing him do what he does is as entertaining as always. Some of the kills are brutal and impressive. At the same time, we see Michael too much. There are many scenes where he's out in the open, and as the film goes along, the fear and tension of not knowing where he is becoming less and less. One of the strengths of the original is that it was sparing with Michael, whether you see his silhouette as he stood outside in the dark, or when he stood behind the hedge bush looking at Laurie, you didn't get the perfect look at him until we get towards the end of the first film. And John Carpenter once again knew that showing the monster too much in a good view would lessen the fear people felt when the monster is seen. Movies like The Giant Claw from 1957, The Thing from Another World, Alien, and even Predator are a few examples where the filmmakers utilized not seeing the monster right away and building suspense for the inevitable reveal. Though I will say that the Giant Claw's reveal was something that many people found hilarious. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at this bastard! One of the reasons why older filmmakers didn't show the monsters as much is because the look of the creatures weren't always the best. Jaws is an example of how not showing the monster as much helped the film, not only because the animatronic shark malfunctioned on set, but also to build up suspense, which obviously served the film greatly. Alien and Predator are some of the best examples of how not showing the monster in full view until the end serves the films better. I mean, not only were these stories fantastic to watch, but the creature designs were next level stuff. So finally getting to see them towards the end of the films was exciting as hell. But I digress. My point in saying all this is that Halloween 2 isn't as scary for me as the first one. Mainly because we see Michael way too often, so when I see him chasing Laurie, it's not as intense or as nail biting as the first movie. But that could just be my personal taste. Another aspect that I'm not particularly fond of is the plot point of Michael and Laurie being siblings. Much like the consistent shots of seeing Michael too much ruining the suspense and fear level, getting an explanation for his motives as a killer and why he's chasing Laurie spoils the first film a little bit for me. The fear of Michael choosing random people to kill and the idea that anybody could be a potential victim is legitimately terrifying. I mean, put yourself in Laurie's shoes, and you can understand on some level the fear behind the idea. Now, that's not to say that the idea of your brother trying to kill you isn't scary, it's just not as scary compared to being randomly chosen. Again, the relatability is much more prevalent in the first film compared to the sequel. With that said, seeing a young Michael and Laurie is interesting. The reveal of Michael and Laurie's relation does answer one question, but it still doesn't answer why he kills in the first place, which is great. Unfortunately, even this plot point gets an explanation, which does ruin the whole franchise for me on some level, more so than the brother-sister angle. But that is for another review, so stay tuned. Despite all my criticism of the plot, the movie redeems itself a little bit by subverting my expectations at the end. In the climax, Michael, Loomis, and Laurie are in a room in the hospital. Michael stabs Loomis with a scalpel, temporarily incapacitating him, and then he goes for Laurie. But then she grabs Loomis's gun and shoots Michael's eyes out. Seeing Michael swing at the air is kind of funny. It's one of the few scenes in this movie that made me laugh out loud. But anyways, Laurie is able to get out of the room, and Loomis, in a brave move, blows himself up with Michael in this awesome scene. And at this point, you think it's over, but all of a sudden, we see Michael on fire walking towards Laurie. And this scene, once again, reminds me of the Thing from Another World. And just as suddenly as he appeared, Michael drops dead, succumbing to the flames and burning to a crisp. It's the one ending, aside from the original, that felt satisfying. With this ending, it ties up some loose ends, and you would think that closes the book on Michael Myers and Dr. Loomis. We wish. Just as a quick side note, in relation to explosions and fire, let's talk about that poor bastard Ben Tramer. Yes, the character that was briefly mentioned in the first film finally gets some screen time, but it's cut short. Or should I say, crushed short, blown up, and set on fire. This is yet another scene where I laughed my ass off. And it is kind of ironic because Ben Tramer was dressed up similar to Michael Myers and dies in a similar way to him. Aside from the dark nature of this scene and how funny it is with the cop that hits him saying, "Oh, I didn't see Ben Tramer," somehow, there's something that doesn't really make sense. We see Ben is dressed almost exactly like Michael, which is confusing because what are the chances he happens to dress just like him? I mean, obviously, Ben isn't trying to mimic Michael because this is still the first night. So, Michael isn't entirely famous, nor is his outfit widely known. So, what's going on here? Nah, I don't know. Who knows, and who really cares at this point? But regardless, rest in peace, Ben Tramer. Another little noteworthy part of this film is a little kid with his mom at the hospital. It is the same kid who plays Andy Wayne in John Carpenter's The Fog. And as you guys already know, I love The Fog, so this is a nice little cameo appearance. Getting back to Michael for a minute, Michael's body movement is another little thing that bothers me just a little bit. His walking is a little too stiff compared to the first film, but this is something small. And the mask as well looks a little off too. As I said in the previous video, the mask does go through many changes as the movie goes along, but apparently the mask is the same one that was used in the first film, but due to some exposure to the elements, it shaped itself, no pun intended, in the form we see in this movie. Overall, Halloween 2 is a film that didn't really need to be made, but with that said, it is a decent film nonetheless, with a few flaws, but can definitely satisfy those who wanted a conclusion to the original film. For me, the first movie will always have the best ending and the most effective use of Michael Myers. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. After the explosive finale of Halloween 2, no pun intended, the franchise was ready to move on, or at least John Carpenter was. After the first Halloween, John Carpenter went on to work on some other projects, hence why he didn't direct Halloween 2. But he did help with the writing, and so it was that Michael Myers was killed off. And since Michael was officially dead, the filmmakers wanted to take Halloween into the intended direction that it was supposed to go, which was an anthology series. It would have explored all the crazy things that could happen on Halloween night. And I'm not gonna lie, this idea sounded promising. I mean, take a look at 2007's Trick or Treat, which was that very concept made into one film. All the stories in that movie were their own standalone arcs that were also connected to each other and had a central figure in Sam, a mysterious little boy slash demon, which was the embodiment of the Halloween spirit. And for a fun horror film with not much substance, it worked. Unfortunately, this is where Season of the Witch falls short for me, and possibly for many others as well. Why, you might ask? Well, early on in Halloween 3's release, and even afterwards, so many people disliked this movie for one main reason, because it didn't have Michael Myers. And in all fairness, I can understand on some level why people held that viewpoint. And I somewhat share that view, but for a different reason. From a chronological standpoint, it's very obvious and understandable as to why Michael isn't in this film. I mean, he was burned to a cinder, so there's no way he could come back, right? Right? Oh. All joking aside, the real reason Michael wasn't and never would have been in this movie is because Season of the Witch does not take place in the Michael Myers universe. It's a completely separate universe and story being told here. We even see the original Halloween on TV throughout many different points in the movie. And for me, this is where Season of the Witch made its mistake. Instead of doing what Trick or Treat did with its separate stories but still taking place in the same area, Season of the Witch opted for being disconnected entirely from the Michael Myers story. And because the movie holds the 3 in Halloween 3, it makes their position much more out of place. If it's not a sequel to Halloween 2, why add on the 3? They could have easily fixed this by making a reference to what happened in Haddonfield. Something as simple as a newspaper with a headline of the Haddonfield Massacre, or a news report on TV, or my personal choice, White Masked Killer Still at Large After Haddonfield Massacre. Really, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch should be Halloween 2, and the story from Halloween 2 should be removed altogether if you wanted to have a proper anthology series. In this way, the filmmakers could leave the door open for Michael to return someday. For me, it would have been better to stick with the ending of the first film, which was the best in the entire franchise for me. Unfortunately, this didn't happen with Halloween 3, and it became a double-edged sword of bad choices. Because Halloween 3 neglected the presence or proper reference to Michael, people didn't like the movie as much, which then gave way to a slew of Halloween sequels that would sink the Halloween franchise to absurd levels of bullshit. But getting the Michael Myers stuff out of the way, let's talk about the story of Season of the Witch. So the movie follows Dr. Daniel Chalice as he attempts to stop an evil corporation called Silver Shamrock from performing a mass druid sacrifice that would kill many children on Halloween night. The way they plan to do this evil deed is by having these children wear special Halloween masks equipped with what I refer to as magic-enhanced technology. Basically, when the corporation sends out a mass signal across the airwaves, the masks with the chips inside will begin killing anyone wearing the mask. The signal is in the form of what must be one of the most insane jingles I've ever heard. And I have to say, for an original horror story, it's not that bad. Tom Atkins is the lead, and it's fantastic to see him again. Tom also starred in The Fog and Escape from New York, two John Carpenter films I absolutely love, as you already know. And once again, he does a great job. He is also accompanied by Stacey Nelkin, who does a decent job as Ellie. They do work well together, even if their romance in the movie is a little, strange, to say the least. I mean, Jesus Christ, it looks like they could be a father-daughter duo. Of course, the hero is only as good as the villain he goes against. And for me, one of the biggest strengths of this film is Connell Cochran, played by Dan O'Herlihy. Sorry if I mispronounced the name. You probably remember him from other media like the first two RoboCop films and Batman the Animated Series. He's very creepy and intimidating. One of my favorite scenes is when he has Tom Atkins tied up and he explains the old Halloween traditions. The cherry on top for this scene is when the original Halloween starts playing and the music syncs up with the scene in a real nice way.
And happy Halloween.
Something interesting to point out is that some plot points in Season of the Witch eventually get used for the Michael Myers sequels. It's all about getting Halloween and its druidic practices back to how they used to be. The theme of sacrifice plays a big part in the story, and really does up the creep factor. There are many scenes in this movie that remind me of Michael Myers. You see, Silver Shamrock has created androids, and it's something reminiscent of Terminator, actually. But these guys are like silent assassins, and the way they move about and stalk people is just like how Michael Myers stalked people. And funny enough, one of the androids is played by Dick Warlock, who played as Michael Myers in Halloween 2. So it's all coming together now. And that's another positive I have about this movie. It feels like a Carpenter film, even though he didn't direct it. It has similar aesthetics and even some John Carpenter regulars. And this movie's pretty ballsy too. I mean, Jesus Christ, it shows kids being killed in grotesque fashion. The filmmakers were not fooling around, and you can feel the ominous atmosphere hovering over this film as it gets closer to Halloween night. For example, when the protagonists arrive at the town where Silver Shamrock is located, something feels off. It's like this town is gripped by some mysterious evil power. A creepy scene is when Dr. Dan and Ellie stop at a motel for the night, and one of their neighbors gets killed by one of the Silver Shamrock chips built into the masks. The scene is real gruesome with some impressive practical effects. If you haven't seen this movie yet, or if you have seen it but it's been a while, I would say give it another watch. It's not as bad as some people give it flack for. I would say just that it would have fared better if it was in the same universe as Michael Myers. And then people probably would have been more kind to it. And unlike the previous film's ending, which was a little more positive and definitive, Season of the Witch leaves off with a gloomy cliffhanger where it appears Silver Shamrock won. And that insane jingle starts playing across the nation with Tom Atkins shouting,
Turn it off! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Overall, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch was a decent horror film with some interesting plot points and ideas. It's not the best horror film out there, but it's certainly not that bad, especially when compared to the Silver Shamrock nightmare levels of crap we will be getting coming up in the review series. So keep a sharp lookout for what's next. And something else I will say is that the masks that we see in this movie have become popular in their own right. It's like a perfect trio of Halloween icons. We get the skeleton, the witch, and the pumpkin. We do see them again in Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills, so it's nice that people are showing more appreciation for what this film tried to do. And like I said earlier, if it was still connected to the original Halloween film, it probably would have been received better. And maybe the franchise would have continued to go the anthology route. But instead, we just get the same old shite with a small dose of Season of the Witch ideas. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. After the fan backlash of Halloween 3's lack of Michael Myers, the filmmakers decided to do a complete 180 and bring Halloween back to its roots. And this is where things start to get a bit messy. First off, Michael Myers died in Halloween 2, so one might think it would be very difficult to bring him back. Well, apparently not, and I guess they didn't put much thought into the logistics of how to properly resurrect someone that burned to a cinder. So, how did they bring Michael back? A straight up reboot? Haha, yeah, it's a little too late for that crap. We'll get to it later. A Friday the 13th Part 6 style resurrection? No. A plot revolving around a cult using dark magic to bring him back? Wrong again. Instead, we get nothing. That's right, nothing. There's no proper explanation as to how Michael Myers is alive after being cooked more than that pizza-faced Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. Oh, and that's not the only returning character from Halloween 2. If Michael Myers surviving an explosion and being burned alive wasn't impossible enough for you, then have fun trying to explain how Dr. Loomis survived. Yeah, that's right, Loomis is back, and there's no real explanation for his survival either. He has some facial disfiguration to at least show he was hurt during the explosion. And considering how they could have been lazy and ignore the previous film altogether by showing no evidence of what happened to Myers or Loomis, we can at least give credit where it's due. With that said, it doesn't really matter because at this point the continuity starts taking a nosedive anyway. A little side note before we dive into the story though, there is one character that doesn't make a return, and in fact she wouldn't return for the rest of this timeline. We're talking about Laurie Strode. We get a brief explanation that she died, but they don't go into much detail. The most likely reason Laurie was killed off was because Jamie Lee Curtis was done with the franchise at this point in time. After Halloween 2, she moved on to different projects, which was a good move, especially considering what happens to the story as the sequels go along. With that said, she does eventually come back 2 more times in different timelines for this franchise, so it is what it is. Now, let's get on to the movie itself. One of the biggest points of discussion or praise I've heard from this film is its opening. Instead of going for the traditional Halloween title opening, the filmmakers opted for an ominous montage scene approach. We get several shots of farmland and Halloween decorations while having this creepy groaning sound playing in the background. This, along with the orange letters appearing, gives off a satisfying visual aesthetic for this opening. It gives off a feeling that something evil is coming, which obviously there is. I mean, the title is The Return of Michael Myers. Anyway, the next scene we get is outside a sanatorium where Michael has been for the past 10 years. Apparently, he's been in a coma all this time. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Get caught in a gas explosion, get set on fire, the worst you get is a coma for 10 years. Yeah, I guess Anakin Skywalker got the short end of that burnt stick. Aside from the absurdity of Michael surviving after the damage he took, I did get a little chuckle from the security guard that escorts the 2 medical personnel up to pick up Michael. His line of "Welcome to Hell" was kind of appropriate and fitting considering where this trilogy goes from here. As we begin to move Michael, we get the Halloween theme playing in the background, which is nice, though it doesn't feel as fitting as I'd like it to. Harkening back to what I said in the previous reviews, the return of the shape should have been more triumphant. If this movie was a direct sequel to the first movie, taking place 10 years later, it would feel more deserved. Regardless, Michael escapes and begins making his way to Haddonfield. But with Laurie dead, he has to target his next of kin, who happens to be Laurie's daughter, Jamie Lloyd, played by Danielle Harris, who would come back to the franchise years later. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If I could sum up this movie, I'd say it's the same shit we got the last two times, with a few different characters, an interesting cliffhanger, and a secret subplot that would not be revealed until the next entry in the trilogy. That's not to say that the movie is terrible, it's just you guys already know my thoughts on all of these sequels if you watched the previous videos. With that said, it is nice to see Donald Pleasence again. Yeah, he's pretty much the same as he was last time, but that's the appeal. Like, yeah, I may not enjoy the movie too much, but it's watchable because of his performance. He plays it serious, and seeing him on his never-ending crusade to kill Michael Myers is awesome. Speaking of Myers, let's talk about that mask. What the hell happened with this mask anyway? It looks absolutely terrible. I know I made a joke about Michael's mask in the first review, but damn, this looks nothing like the original Myers mask. And in fact, I'd say that it's probably the worst mask in the franchise so far, at least for me. I also find it funny that Michael puts together the same outfit he wore the first time around. He kills a guy, takes his boiler suit, then steals a mask from a store. Honestly, if the filmmakers wanted Michael to look similar to how he was in the first two movies, then they should have done something a little bit more creative. Something like making him a zombie that was resurrected by the Cult of Thorn. I think Cinemasker said it best.
I still say he should have been like a zombie. Oh, would that have been too much like Jason Voorhees? Well, who came first now?
Now let's talk about Michael's new target. With Laurie Strode out of the picture, Jamie Lloyd, who is Michael's niece, is the person we focus on the most. Though this time Michael's obsession isn't with a high schooler, but an elementary schooler. It is a little strange as to why Michael seems obsessed with killing his family. Of course, we all know why if you've seen the sequels, but in isolation, it doesn't make much sense. We know that Michael is willing to kill pretty much anybody, so him moving on is fine, but it just so happens that he finds out that his sister had a daughter, and it's like a switch had been turned on. His sole focus is his bloodline. Jamie as a character does work well for the story, though. Sometimes with child actors, the performances can be hit or miss, but Danielle Harris does a good job. We have this scene at her school where she's being harassed by these little shits about not wearing her Halloween costume. They say that they know her uncle is Michael Myers, which is interesting. It sort of implies that some people in the town are aware of who she is and her family's dark past. I feel that this scene is subtly setting up the ending of this film. In a way, it reminds me a little of how they present Michael's story in the Rob Zombie film, though without the retarded white trash stuff, of course. And funny enough, when Jamie gets to the store, she ends up picking out a clown outfit that looks similar to the one Michael had in the first movie. We even have this weird fade-in of a young Michael Myers in the mirror as Jamie looks at herself. The references to the previous films and the foreshadowing are a couple of other strong aspects of this movie. It's pretty good. Another thing I like in this movie is when Loomis is trying to hitch a ride to get to Haddonfield. This one car pulls over and it has a few high schoolers. They tell Loomis to hop in, and as he gets close, they speed off, leaving a trail of dust shooting in his face. What a bunch of dicks. If this was Grand Theft Auto 5, I'd pull out an RPG and blow that sucker to hell. Yeah! After that, we meet an awesome character. Loomis gets picked up by a drunk reverend. This guy is hilarious. The two have an awesome exchange of dialogue. They're talking about hunting evil, and the reverend says that damnation always has a face, and always has a name.
You're hunting it, ain't you? Yeah, you're hunting it all right. Just like me.
What are you hunting, Mr. Sam?
Apocalypse, end of the world, Armageddon. It's always got a face and a name.
All this dialogue is talking about Michael Myers without saying his name, and it's awesome that they can convey this without any specifics. And to top it off, Loomis takes a big hit of a whiskey bottle. Classic. When Loomis does get to Haddonfield, he shows up at the sheriff's station. At this point, this scene is basically a repeat of what we've already heard. Loomis says Michael is back in Haddonfield, and at first the sheriff is a little hesitant on believing him, but he does eventually come around. At least he comes around a lot quicker than Sheriff Brackett did. Something interesting to point out here is that we see a modern incarnation of the angry villagers trope. I guess the town of Haddonfield really doesn't want a repeat of what happened 10 years ago, so a bunch of rednecks get together to try and hunt down Michael. Oh god, this is it. This is where it started. This is the seed of Evil Dies Tonight. This is where it was planted.
Evil dies tonight!
Evil dies tonight!
Evil dies tonight!
We also get another little Halloween-related trope of the fake Michael Myers, with some dumb shits pulling a prank dressed up as him. Something we'll see again very soon. One other thing I'll mention before I talk about the ending is that Michael Myers uses a gun. Yeah, for real. But he doesn't use it in the way that you think that someone would use a gun. Instead of shooting it like any normal schmuck would, he stabs with it. It would have made sense if there was a bayonet attachment, but there wasn't. Who the hell stabs someone with a gun? Alright, let's talk about this ending. So, out of all the sequels that started with 4 and went onward, this one had the most interesting idea. First off, Michael finds Jamie and Rachel with the rednecks, kills some of the rednecks, and they end up in a chase by the cemetery. Michael is unconscious for the time being, and Jamie goes over and sits by him as the police arrive, something I think will become relevant later. As she begins walking away, Michael rises up and the cops begin opening fire on him. This scene is akin to the shootout in Predator. He then falls to the ground and debris falls on top of him and they say he's dead. Really? So, getting shot a few times, falling into the ground, and having crap fall on him is what does him in? After all the abuse he took in the previous films, that's it? Okay then, a little bit of a letdown if you ask me. Anyway, after we get back to Jamie's place, everything seems normal. The nightmare appears to be over, but all of a sudden, we begin seeing some familiar visuals. A POV shot of someone wandering through the house starts. A hand grabs a pair of scissors, puts on a mask, and makes its way to the bathroom where Jamie's adopted mother is running a bath. We then hear a blood-curdling scream, and Loomis makes his way towards the stairway. He then sees Jamie in the clown mask with the scissors covered in blood, and Loomis screams. Wow, what an ending. And the cherry on top was that the Halloween theme was playing in the background too. And aside from the first film's ending, this is the best of the sequels. It came out of nowhere. You could argue that this was an obvious setup because of all the dreams and visions she was having. However, that isn't really concrete considering that Laurie was having a dream about Michael too, but as a child. But the context is different, so you can't really compare the two very much. With that said, the ending was amazing, and it was a fruitful setup for a future sequel. But of course, just like the missed opportunity in Season of the Witch, Halloween 4 The Return of Michael Myers would have a good idea pissed away in the sequel. Funny enough, that seems to be a recurring theme in these sequels. They have some nice setups that eventually get flushed down the shitter. All things considered, it's not that bad of a sequel, at least compared to the other sequels in this Thorn trilogy. But for me, the series went downhill after Halloween 3. The first film and Season of the Witch are really the only standouts in this franchise, with a little leeway to 4 because of the ending, but if you've never seen this film, you're not missing much. Would I recommend watching it? Maybe, but it does depend on what kind of horror films you like to indulge yourself into. And because most of these Halloween films follow the same basic formula for the most part, I would say just stick with the original if you have a masked slasher itch that needs scratching. Ever since I watched the original Halloween, I gained an understanding and appreciation for the simplistic story it presented. It's one of the many reasons I'm so critical of the sequels. I know it sounds counterintuitive as a Michael Myers fan to say that we should have had less of Myers in certain cases. With that said, hear me out. I would say that there are a few franchises that benefit from doing the same thing over and over. One example is Friday the 13th, a franchise that took a lot of inspiration from Halloween. For F-13, it's a simple and entertaining formula, with crappy characters, modern exploitation, and a legendary icon that defined an entire decade of cinema. The thing is that those elements don't work for Halloween, at least for me. While it set the modern standard for our slasher films and countless films began imitating it, Halloween would eventually begin to imitate the imitators. The idea of the franchise being an anthology series was the best thing the franchise could do. And if they had done it properly, we could have seen an eventual legendary return of Michael Myers. Instead, Michael Myers is like that drunk uncle that comes by every Christmas, dressed as Santa Claus that gives you all the shitty presents. My point in saying all of that is that we ended up getting too much Michael Myers, and it got to the point where he wasn't scary anymore. As we'll soon see, Michael Myers gets a backstory to explain why he does all the killing. Just like I said in my Halloween 2 review, seeing Michael way too much or seeing some dumb schmucks dress up like him too much lessens the fear of his presence. Imagine if in Predator we got that awesome reveal of the creature earlier in the film. It would have taken the fear factor away from the rest of the film because it's like, oh, that's it? That's what it looks like? And that very logic can be applied to the entire franchise. So much so that there were 3 reboots in the series. The first was the H2O timeline, which ignored 4 through 6. Then we had the Rob Zombie films, which remade the entire series with 2 films. And now we have the Blumhouse trilogy, which ignores everything past the first film and retcons the ending of the first. To say that we haven't seen an oversaturation of Michael Myers is ignoring the very franchise that's been created over the years. And look, if you love seeing Michael Myers as much as you see Jason Voorhees with a new entry almost every year, that's fine. For me, it's blatant and obvious why this series has gone downhill. What once was Halloween became a ripoff of Friday the 13th. With that all said, let's actually get into this review, shall we? One good thing I'll say about this movie is that the mask looks leagues better than 4's. It still looks a little off, but it's a hell of a lot closer to the original mask. The performance is also decent. Michael does feel more scary here, which is nice, though this does get a little ruined towards the end of the film, but we'll talk about that later. So the movie picks up where part 4 left off, with Michael falling through a shaft. I think it's a mine shaft. We get a small recap of what happened previously, and they sort of do it Rocky style, with them reusing some of the ending scene. Though this time the cops throw what looks like a stick of dynamite down there to finish Michael off. Wow. What an explosive beginning, huh? That was a nice touch, but as expected, Michael escapes and he flows downriver. He eventually comes across a homeless guy and Michael just passes out. And for the next year, Michael will be unconscious. And you know what? I'm glad they didn't have the movie stay on the same night. This aspect of having the sequel take place on the same night is something I really don't like too much because it doesn't leave much room for the story to grow. With that said, Michael eventually wakes up a year later on Halloween Eve, and the same stuff happens again. He goes around killing people and continues his hunt for Jamie. And speaking of Jamie, this is where they sort of pissed away an interesting opportunity. You see, part 4 ended with Jamie apparently killing her stepmother, and it left open a chance for the subsequent sequels to focus on Jamie as a killer, inheriting her uncle's curse. But it wasn't meant to be, as we focus back on Michael. And it really is a shame though, because the story could have been interesting. Having the focus be on an adult Jamie could have presented some different story points, and maybe even show us the Cult of Thorn utilizing the Michael Myers curse or something. Regardless, Jamie is in a children's clinic, and she continues to have reoccurring nightmares of Michael. This goes a step further by showing us that Jamie and Michael are connected telepathically somehow. Every time Michael is about to kill someone, Jamie starts spazzing out. She can even see what Michael sees to some degree. And this is an interesting idea, and it's also a bit familiar too. Horror fans might see some resemblance to the movie Pumpkinhead, where Lance Henriksen's character is connected to the Pumpkinhead monster every time it kills someone. So it's nice to see at least that the filmmakers be a little bit more creative with some of this stuff. Compared to the first film, we didn't do too much different with the franchise, so at least this one tried. This is also the point where the franchise introduces a new narrative that really flat out ruins Michael as a character. You see, throughout the film, we've been seeing this symbol pop up. We see it first on Michael's wrist in the beginning of the movie, and then we see it pop up here and there. We also get the introduction of a mysterious character dubbed the Man in Black. Basically, he's this random guy that's always shrouded in darkness and wearing a black trench coat, a black fedora, and black boots with spurs that clink and clank as he walks. And this guy also has the mysterious symbol on his wrist. In concept, this was pretty interesting. At the time, there wasn't any explanation as to who this guy was and why he was so important to the story. That is until the end of the film, but more on that in a bit. Dr. Loomis is back, as usual, and doing what he usually does, though at a certain point in the movie he tries to reason with Michael, which is really odd considering he knows that there was nothing but blank inside of Michael. And this is where I start to dislike the direction they begin taking with Michael. You see, every film up until now has presented Michael as an unstoppable force of destruction. He's kind of like a hurricane, and he's not human, he has no emotion, he is the shape. But this movie mixes that up. For most of the movie, Michael is as we always know him to be. But at the end of the film, they do a complete 180. First off, Loomis talks to Michael about his inner rage about killing his family, which is really off because, again, Michael has no visible emotion. But what's going on here is that they are making known in some small way who is really pulling Michael's strings and why Michael kills in the first place. But it gets even worse when Michael and Jamie are together and Jamie calls him uncle. He takes his mask off and he starts shedding tears. What? First of all, Michael was burned to a crisp in Halloween 2. And on top of that, his eyes got shot out. So how in God's name does his face and eyes look completely normal? And why is he crying? What the hell is going on here? Michael showing emotion makes about as much sense as Danner letting go of his hatred for giraffes. None of this makes any sense. And that's not all. What the hell happened to the Myers house? I mean, Jesus Christ, it looks like it was designed by a medieval architect, and later Poison Ivy showed up and had a mass plant party. And believe it or not, the worst is yet to come. At this point, nobody really gives a shit about the continuity in this series. Michael's different, the house is different, and somehow he still has his skin and hair intact after being engulfed in flames. After Michael reveals his face to Jamie, they almost embrace, but then Michael snaps out of it and tries to kill her. Loomis shows up and uses Jamie as bait to lure Michael into a trap. Loomis then drops a chain net on Michael, shoots him with a few tranquilizer darts, and starts beating him with a piece of wood. And the cherry on top is, as Loomis is hitting Michael, he's shouting, "Die!" And the way he does it is very similar to how Tommy Jarvis killed Jason in Friday the 13th Part 4. The next scene takes place at the police station, and we see that Michael's chained up in a cell. Everything seems normal. Jamie takes one final look at him, and she leaves with the police officer. But then, all of a sudden, we see the Man in Black show up. Then there's an explosion inside the station, and the Man in Black starts shooting up the place. And this part really reminds me of the shootout from the first Terminator, just a little bit. Afterwards, Jamie walks back into the police station and sees Michael is gone. So the shape is on the loose again, and we fade to black. Well, I guess we should have expected Michael to escape. It's nothing new for this franchise. Of course, we won't get an explanation for the Man in Black or the mysterious symbol until the next film. I'd sum up this movie as a mix of good and bad. There are some redeeming features, but with that said, this movie, like all the other sequels, reinforces what I've been saying about this franchise all along. And it's a real shame because they could have utilized the anthology aspect as well as the cult aspect with Michael in it. In fact, in the next review, I'll give my idea for how this series could have gone if it utilized some of these aspects properly. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. What happened to the 6? I guess the filmmakers said screw with numbering the sequels. Now, before we get into this review, let's get some miscellaneous stuff out of the way. First off, there are 2 different versions of this film. Yeah, apparently the original cut, which is known as the producer's cut, was so bad, they made a new version with alternate scenes. It's the first time I've heard of a producer's cut, but regardless, a new version is known as the theatrical cut. And because these new scenes changed up the plot a bit, I'll be talking about both cuts. Great. 2 shitty movies in one review.
Good. Twice the pride, double the fall.
Alright then, let's start with the opening. So, in both versions, we see Jamie Lloyd, now a teenager, and she's been abducted by a mysterious cult. And it's revealed that she is pregnant. In this case, I think the producer's cut does a better bridging of the previous film to this one. If you remember, the last we seen of Jamie Lloyd was at the police station after Michael was set free by the Man in Black. After that, the movie fades to black. This time, we get a couple flashback scenes that implies that the Man in Black kidnapped Jamie and has been holding her all this time. Really? Well, what the hell have they been doing with her all these years? She was like 9 years old the last time we saw her, and now she's a teenager. She has a baby too, and what do they plan to do with her and the baby? Well, we'll find out later. For now, one of the women working with the cult helps Jamie and the baby escape. At this point, both versions are the same, with Michael showing up and giving us the first kill of the movie. The look of Michael is pretty good for this film. The mask looks a hell of a lot better than Part 5's mask, which is nice, and this opening still keeps Michael as being scary. As both versions continue, Jamie ends up at a bus station looking for help. She tries to call the police, but there's no one available, so she calls into a radio show pleading for them to help, and she even calls for Dr. Loomis. At this point, we're reintroduced to Tommy Doyle, played by Paul Rudd. Yes, that Paul Rudd. Many people have criticized his acting in this film, saying it's basically a poor performance. Personally, I'm indifferent to his acting here. 6 movies into this franchise, and it's like, yeah, okay, his acting isn't anything to praise, but I just don't care at this point. We also see Loomis get a visit from an old friend, a character that we haven't seen since the first movie, Dr. Wynn. How interesting to see him again of all people. Aside from Dr. Loomis, there's not many characters that I found likable. I had some investment in Tommy, but that's only because I like Paul Rudd, even if his performance is generic and uninspired. Everyone else is bland and forgettable. We have Mr. Strode, who is a complete prick. He smacks his own adult daughter, making her bleed. What an ass. Luckily, he gets a gruesome death, so that's something to look forward to. The deaths in this movie are pretty crazy. In the theatrical cut, Mr. Strode's head explodes. Horror fans always love a good head explosion. Towards the end of the theatrical cut, Michael goes on a murderous rampage. It is nice to see Michael doing what he's doing without too much involvement with the cult. Regardless of all that, Jamie doesn't get any help and she runs out of the station and gets ran off the road by a barn. At this point, she's being stalked by Michael. In the producer's cut, she gets stabbed with a knife, while in the theatrical cut, she's impaled on a piece of farm equipment. And as Michael goes for the baby in the truck Jamie was driving, the baby is gone. Well, for an opening scene, it could be worse, I guess. But funny enough, the worst is yet to come in this movie. Remember in my review of Halloween 3, I said the filmmakers would reuse certain plot points from that film in later sequels? Well, this is where those plot points are used again, but in a different way. I said back then that it was all about Halloween and getting it back to its sacrificial origins. So the cult in this film is called the Cult of Thorn. Their symbol is the same one we've seen in the previous film on the wrists of Michael and the Man in Black. What's happening here is that there is a druid curse that brings up some nasty crap. Think the 10 plagues of Egypt in the Exodus story, but for druids. In order to avert disaster, the sacrifice of a family is required. So that's why Michael's been out on a hunt for his family this whole time. An interesting idea, but for God's sake, why does it have to be for Michael Myers? When you boil it down, Michael is just a pawn, a tool for the Cult of Thorn to use. And I hate this idea so much. It's so far removed from the simple yet terrifying story that we were given in 1978. So the goal is for Michael to eliminate his entire bloodline, which is Jamie and her baby. But there's more to this, and oh my god, does it get stupid. More on that later. So we get reintroduced to the Strode family, who just so happens to be living in the old Myers house. And as a quick side note, at least it doesn't look like a goddamn medieval castle. Anyways, the Strodes are living here, and we see that they have kids of their own, one of whom is an adult. Their daughter has a son named Danny, and throughout the film he keeps having visions of the Man in Black, as well as Michael Myers. He also keeps hearing voices telling him to kill. We can assume that this is what drove Michael to kill Judith in 1963, but this really doesn't go anywhere. Just like with the Jamie Lloyd cliffhanger in Halloween 4, they don't utilize anyone but Michael as the killer. Danny's importance to the story is very limited, so we'll just move on. Something positive I will say is that certain scenes feel like the classic Halloween. We get several music cues of the original Halloween soundtrack, and the scenes of Michael stalking people are decent, though it doesn't make much sense to praise a movie for something that's to be expected, specifically if it's in a pre existing franchise. The thing is that these music cues mainly come up in the producer's cut. Why this didn't carry over to the theatrical cut more, I have no idea. While writing this review, I watched both versions simultaneously, and it's bizarre to see how many changes they made to this one film. One change is that Jamie survives Michael's attack at the beginning of the producer's cut, but eventually gets killed at the hospital. Either way, Michael's target is Jamie's son, who Tommy names Steven. But Michael doesn't stop there. He's also trying to kill the rest of the Strode family. Tommy finds Danny, and they wait at the Myers house where Kara Strode finds them. Tommy tells them that they are in danger and begins to explain the druid symbols and their relation to Michael Myers, further explaining why he kills. He tells Kara that Michael sees anyone who lives at his house as his family, which makes no sense. We also get an explanation for why the movie is called The Curse of Michael Myers, funny enough. It's also interesting to point out that we actually get a little of this mythos in Halloween 2, where Dr. Loomis is at a school, and written in blood on the wall is Sam Hain, which isn't actually pronounced that way, but who cares? While it is nice to have a callback to Halloween 2, this is something that really annoys me. This film is simultaneously ruining the Michael Myers mythos by explaining everything. I think Cinemaster put it best when he said this.
But overall, the idea of Michael Myers being reduced from a mysterious killer that acts on his own will to being a pawn of a cult is a terrible idea. He was more frightening when he was his own entity killing people for no explained reason. In the first movie, when Dr. Loomis explains that he's pure evil and has the devil's eyes, that's all you ever needed to know. Giving him all this backstory and making someone else in control of him flat out ruined the whole thing.
And don't get me wrong, I actually like the cult aspect of this movie. It's a nice callback to Halloween 3. The problem is that they are tying this in with Michael and why he kills, instead of them being completely separate entities. The producer's cut has more of the cult aspects prevalent, whereas the theatrical stays a little closer to how Michael is supposed to be. Okay, let's talk about some stupid crap. Throughout the film, the focus has been on keeping Jamie's son alive. Because he's Michael's next of kin after Jamie, it makes sense as to why Michael wants him dead. But the producer's cut takes this point a step further, or I should say several creepy and disturbing steps further. So it turns out that the father of Jamie's son, Stephen, is Michael Myers.
That is disgusting, awkward, tone-deaf, shameful, wrong, juvenile, dirty, creepy, insulting, and it's just plain fucking stupid!
This is supposed to be Halloween, by the way. You know, that franchise about a mass killer that murders people. And putting aside the complete stupidity of the uncle dad thing, how exactly was this a good idea to impregnate your own niece and kill your baby? It's explained that the Curse of Thorn requires a sacrifice of an entire family in order to avert famine and disaster. Michael is afflicted with the Curse of Thorn and will only be set free once the last of his bloodline is eliminated. Okay, so if Jamie is the last of his bloodline, why would they need another of Michael's bloodline? Why didn't the cult just have Michael kill her right there? It was the prime opportunity. She couldn't get away, and no one would save her. By getting her pregnant and allowing her to give birth, you've just opened the door for a possible escape, and by extension, delaying your plans even further.
Not a great plan.
The theatrical cut isn't any better, nor does it solve the problem of having two living relatives of Michael Myers. Whether or not Myers is the dad, the cult could have just eliminated Jamie and her baby right there. Hell, this movie shows us that the cult kidnapped Jamie at the end of Halloween 5, so why didn't they have Michael kill her then? When we last see Jamie, she's a kid, but now in this film she's a teenager. Why haven't they offed her yet? What use was there in creating another blood relative to Michael Myers? It also turns out that the man in black was Dr. Wynn this whole time, and he also happens to be the leader of the cult. Here's yet another attempt to call back to the first film. I guess we can assume that Dr. Wynn was the one giving Michael driving lessons this whole time.
Sam Haddonfield is 150 miles away from here. Now, for God's sakes, he can't drive a car. He was doing very well last night. Maybe someone around here gave him lessons.
Alright, let's talk about the ending. First off, both endings take place at Smith's Grove. And depending on your investment in following Michael Myers so far, you have two choices on which ending you think is better and what the endings mean. Based on what I picked up on, both endings have Michael surviving. The theatrical cut has Tommy supposedly beating Michael to death, but at the end we see Michael's mask lying on the ground where he was earlier. Then we hear Loomis screaming bloody murder. I'm guessing Michael caught up to him because he was dumb enough to stay at Smith's Grove by himself instead of going with Tommy and Kara. Now, this scream was taken from the producer's cut, and the clip of Loomis staying behind was also taken from the producer's cut. Speaking of which, this cut heavily reduces Michael as we know him. While in the theatrical cut, Michael is shown killing many people at the end, like he always does. The producer's cut has him standing around for the most part. Tommy comes up with this plan to use these druid rune stones to cancel out Michael's thorn energy or something. It works funny enough, and Tommy, with Kara, Danny, and the baby, are able to escape. This is where Loomis stays behind, just like in the theatrical cut. So Loomis goes back to where Michael was standing and notices that he is now laying on the ground. He unmasks Michael, and it's Dr. Wynn. He tells Loomis that Michael is gone, and now it's his turn to watch over Michael. We see Michael is now dressed up as Dr. Wynn, and he walks off. Loomis looks at his own wrist and sees a symbol of Thorn on it. And here comes the scream. And that's how the movie ends, with that damn scream in both versions. Sadly, this scream would be the last thing that Donald Pleasence would ever do on film, as he passed away shortly after this movie was completed. It really is heartbreaking to see a legendary actor go. It's a path that we will all walk down eventually. And it sucks that this was his last outing in such a shit film. With that said, we can at least appreciate what he did for the Halloween series. I think it's safe to say that Donald Pleasence carried this franchise on his back up to this point. And despite all the stupidity in it, I think he's earned his rest. Thank you so much, Donald Pleasence, for your amazing work. Your legacy lives on. Jesus Christ. Well, that's Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. And that's also the end of the Thorn trilogy, and the last we see of Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasence. Was it all worth it? Yes and no. From one point of view, seeing Donald Pleasence is really the only reason to sit through these films. They're not very good, especially when compared to the first film. But that said, Donald Pleasence makes it worth watching at least once. We owe him that. Everything else? No. I can do without the cheap masks, the explanation of why Michael kills, and the whole Uncle Dad BS. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers is just a generic horror movie with more focus on a cult and their evil practices rather than the terrifying and immortal killer Michael Myers. Which, by the way, we never get an explanation as to why Michael is immortal, but who cares? I said in the last video that I would give my own idea for how to utilize Michael Myers and include the Cult of Thorn in this series. So, here we go. You start out with the first Halloween and keep the original ending intact. From there, you turn Halloween 3 Season of the Witch into Halloween 2 Season of the Witch, and have the story take place in the Michael Myers universe. The story would take place a few years later. During Season of the Witch, show something like a memorial of the Haddonfield Massacre that took place years ago. Have Silver Shamrock connected to the Cult of Thorn and have Conal Cochran as a member. You can even show him with the Cult of Thorn symbol on his wrist. After Season of the Witch, make Halloween 3 and 4 and have it feature the return of Dr. Dan Chalice. A fun idea could be to have Dr. Chalice and Dr. Loomis team up. They could be on a quest to hunt down the Cult of Thorn. They could face some creepy supernatural threats, and at the end of Halloween 4, have it reveal that the Cult of Thorn has been looking for Michael Myers all these years. The reason is they believe that Michael is a supernatural entity. From here, you give the audience a teaser that calls back to Michael being on the loose again at the end of the original Halloween. And now, he's coming back. Then boom, Halloween 5, The Return of Michael Myers. The story could be a mix of Halloween 2018 and the original Halloween 4. Laurie has a family now, she has a husband, and her daughter could be Jamie Lloyd. Laurie is basically how she is in the 2018 film, with all the traps and such. And this time it would make sense because unlike in 2018 where Michael was caught in 1978, this time Michael was never caught. He's still out there, somewhere. And Laurie has prepped herself and her family to be ready should Michael come back to Haddonfield. Then have an epic trio of Dr. Dan Chalice, Dr. Samuel Loomis, and Laurie Strode fighting against Michael in the Cult of Thorn. You could utilize aspects of Season of the Witch and bring in John Carpenter to direct. God damn it, there was so much potential with this franchise. And I know I just threw a boatload of fanfiction your way, guys. With that said, I hope you can see from my perspective how Halloween could have been so much better. Instead of getting the same old shit, we could have had a popular franchise that made the horror slasher genre even better than it was. Let Friday the 13th be known for being the cheesy horror franchise with terrible characters and modern exploitation. Meanwhile, Halloween would be going to the next level with new stories that are connected to an overall narrative. Basically have it like how the MCU built up their universe. You can see that there were aspects of the Thorn trilogy that I liked. Not all of it was bad, it was just heavily misused. I know many people today are tired of the whole shared universe aspect for movies these days, but imagine if they utilized even a little of my suggestions for the Halloween franchise back then. Boy, would it have been awesome. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the HalloScream Review Series. Today, we're reviewing Scream. I mean, Scream with werewolves. No. I mean, Scream with vampires. Oh, damn.
Damn!
I mean, Scream with Michael Myers. Okay. Before we dive into this, I'm aware that many of you love H2O. Some say it's a return to form for the Halloween franchise. Funny enough, that same "it's a return to form" or "it's the best since the original" has been going around a lot lately. So what's the big deal with H2O? What made it so popular and beloved among horror fans? Well, to find out, let's take a look at the time period this movie came out in. It was the tail end of the 90s. At this point, the slasher genre was on its last leg, and horror in general was beginning to take a new turn. Some existing horror franchises from the 80s were putting out lackluster entries. This is where we began seeing the Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy's Dead, and the Bride of Chucky's of the world pop in. Horror was on a downward slope. There were some standouts though. Candyman, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, The Mummy, Predator 2, and even Army of Darkness were pretty good. Of course, there was one movie that stood out even among them that gave a little spark of life to the dying slashers. That movie was Scream. Scream somehow reinvigorated interest in slashers with its constant references to the movies of old. It also gave us a new slasher icon in Ghostface. Its use of exploiting cliches from older horror films and poking fun at them became popular in its own right. Of course, even this franchise became a victim of its own trend, with lackluster sequels. I know, gasp, clench your pearls. Yeah, that's right, I didn't really enjoy the Scream sequels, and honestly, I thought the first Scream was average at best. Now, I won't deny the cultural impact the film had on the world of horror. With that said, it began setting a standard for horror films going into the 2000s. Hence the reason I made that joke at the beginning of this video. It seemed that every horror film coming out felt like Scream. You have Scream with vampires, werewolves, sharks, and now we've come to H2O. And it's also no coincidence that the original Scream heavily referenced the original Halloween. So much so that they're watching the damn movie in the third act of the film. So while I can appreciate Scream for its impact on the slasher genre, it also set the groundwork for more shitty Halloween sequels. That's why, whenever I watch H2O, it feels like I'm watching Scream. So, with that all being said, let's dive straight into this. Halloween, 20 years later. First off, I find it funny that this movie opens up with the same song that Halloween 2 ended with. It's important since this movie is retconning 4 through Curse of Michael Myers out of existence. I also find it hilarious because this movie will once again remind us of a film that featured Michael Myers getting his eyes shot out, being caught in an explosion, and being engulfed in flames, thereby burning to a cinder. Again, the filmmakers are ignoring continuity, something that's becoming really annoying at this point. Anyways, the opening scene takes place in Langdon, Illinois, and we see a familiar face in Nurse Chambers. Remember her? She was the nurse driving with Dr. Loomis in the original film. Curious as to why she's back all of a sudden. Last time we seen her was in Halloween 2. It's also October 29th, 1998, so we're approaching the 20th anniversary of the Haddonfield Massacre. It's nice I can use that saying in something that isn't fanfiction or wishful thinking for this franchise. So, as Nurse Chambers goes to unlock the door to her house, she notices that her porch light is broken. She then proceeds to open the door and hesitate to walk through. You can hear some breathing in the background, so we can safely assume that someone is in the house still. And instead of doing the typical cliche of walking into the house like an idiot, she actually goes next door for help. Well, that's a nice change of pace. She ends up finding 2 kids, and one of them is a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He goes into Nurse Chambers' house, making some vague, shitty threats. If it's Michael in here, these threats mean jack to him, especially considering what Michael has been through in these films. Levitt walks through the house and comes across Nurse Chambers' office. It's a complete mess, and it looks like someone was there searching for something. This will become important later. He moves on to the kitchen and starts taking some beers from the refrigerator. What a little shit, taking adult beverages without asking. So the coast is clear, it seems, and they each go their separate ways. But we know something is up. It's never that easy, especially in these kinds of films. I guess one positive I can say so far is that they are building up the inevitable reveal of Michael. As she makes her way to her office, she shines a flashlight and we see a picture of Dr. Loomis. A nice touch considering he passed away after Curse. She looks on her desk to find a folder with the label Laurie Strode. The folder is empty, so we know someone was looking for info on Laurie, and clearly they found it. Nurse Chambers hears a noise and she sees her front door is wide open, and from behind her we get our first look at Michael. She runs to Levitt's house looking for help, only to find an ice skate embedded in his head, and giving us our first cold body of the movie. Yeah, okay, I know. Terrible joke. Anyways, she runs to the back door and finds the other kid dead, and we get our second look at Michael. And my god, look at that mask. Look how cool it is. It almost looks just like the classic mask. Man, I can't wait to see this mask in action throughout the movie. Oh. We then see Nurse Chambers get killed with a throat cut while calling for the police that showed up at her house. Damn, why would they just kill her off like that? I get she was a minor character, but it's just weird that they would bring her back just for that. Well, at least we won't have to see this shameful act of bringing back legacy characters just to kill them off again.
This is for Dr. Loomis.
Oh, come on! Okay, here's my question. How the hell did these two knucklehead cops not hear a damn window shattering? They were only a few feet away, and the sound of glass breaking isn't exactly quiet. Anyways, we then see Michael driving away in a car, and it cuts to the next day. The police are at the scene of the murders, and we get a little exposition dump of the whole Halloween story, as if we needed a reminder. They talk about Loomis passing away, and how Michael's body was never found. They also explain how Loomis had been looking for Michael as well. And I find it funny and a bit coincidental that this is similar to my idea of how Michael should have never been caught, and how he's still out there somewhere. The problem is that they made this movie a sequel to Halloween 2. So, how is it once again Loomis and Michael survived that damn explosion at the hospital? Now, one could say this movie is a direct sequel to the first Halloween, and that the only reason we are seeing pictures of Halloween 2 is because the filmmakers are using that material the same way they would use footage from Halloween 2 when Halloween Kills. But obviously this isn't the case, as they reveal that Michael and Laurie are still siblings anyways. God, we're not even 20 minutes into this movie and look how many issues are popping up. We get the H2O title card and a new version of the Halloween theme. Everything I've seen so far in this movie feels and looks like Scream, and it annoys the hell out of me. I said in a previous review that Halloween eventually began imitating the imitators, and this movie is a great example. The opening feels like Scream, some of the music feels like Scream, and this is supposed to be Halloween, damn it. Oh, and they have a voiceover play of someone impersonating Dr. Loomis when he was talking to Sheriff Brackett about Michael, but it sounds so cheap, and it's word for word what he said. Why didn't they just get a clip from the movie and use it? Why redo it? Or even better, why do this at all? This opening is trying to make Michael's return feel more triumphant. The problem is that Michael's been back too many times. Hell, he's been back more times than the goddamn Terminator.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'm back.
I'll be back.
What?
I'm almost out. I'll be back.
You've been back enough. I'll be back.
As we roll through the opening credits, we see a newspaper clip saying that Laurie Strode died in a car crash. Funny enough, this is how Jamie Lloyd's father died in Halloween 4. Of course, we find out that Laurie isn't actually dead, but she faked her death and chose a new name. Her new name is Carrie Tate, and she's now in charge of a private high school. This idea does make some sense. If you found out that the person who tried to kill you was never caught, one of two things would happen. One, you fake your death, move to a new place, and change your name. Or, you do it the badass way. Build yourself a home, rig it with traps and safety protocols, train yourself to fight and use guns, then wait for the SOB to come to your door and waste them. Personally, I like the latter option because it sounds more like my style. Regardless, Laurie is still alive, and she's been having recurring nightmares about Michael. These nightmares result in Laurie screaming in her sleep. We then see her son John run in to try and wake her up. Yeah, that's right, Laurie has a son now. You know, I had a bit of a messed up yet funny theory. Maybe H2O isn't a direct sequel to Halloween 2, but to Curse of Michael Myers. Obviously, there would be a lot of continuity they would be ignoring in this film, considering there's nothing here about the Cult of Thorn. But then again, they've been saying screw the continuity since Halloween 4, so who cares? But I do find the idea that Laurie hated what happened to her so much, and that she abandoned her own daughter and rushed to California, too funny. And of course, that means Laurie had let her daughter die. Some grade A parenting right there. Anyways, the whole point of this film is that Michael is tracking down Laurie after all these years. We get a group of these high schoolers that stay behind while the other students go on a field trip. This is clearly a setup for the suspense building, given the isolation feel of the first two films. Obviously, they had to do this because it would be kinda hard to have Michael stalking people if there's a bunch of kids walking around. Just like in the previous films, the characters are forgettable. And it's a shame too because we have Laurie's son John, who is the only other character that gets any kind of importance. And he sucks too. At least with the Thorn trilogy, you cared about Jamie. On top of the fact that she was just a child, she was the last of the Myers family aside from Michael. So her importance to the story was key. Now we have 3 living Myers relatives, Michael, Laurie, and now John. And how about Laurie? Well, she's alright, I guess. Many fans praise Jamie's performance and the depth that the character has post-Halloween 2. Her PTSD from that night 20 years ago is a decent fit. I see quite a few fans say they prefer this version of Laurie over how they handled her in Halloween 2018. One argument I've heard is the H2O portrayal is more realistic and fits with the genre better. I'd like to discuss this, and I know I'm jumping ahead very early for Halloween 2018. With that said, I feel this is an appropriate time to discuss this while we're here at Halloween 20 years later. When discussing things we like in movies, particularly in horror movies, we often talk about fictional scenarios. Many horror films in general are unrealistic. Whether it be Jason Voorhees being resurrected Frankenstein style, or Freddy Krueger killing you in your dreams, we as the audience go into these films with a suspension of disbelief. So when someone says they prefer the H2O version of Laurie over the 2018 version because it's more realistic, I scratch my head. What you should say is that you prefer the H2O version over the 2018 version because you like it more. If you want to talk realistic in the Halloween franchise, then please explain how Michael and Loomis survived being caught in an explosion and being engulfed in flames. By the way, this movie is a direct sequel to Halloween 2. So do yourself a favor and drop the realistic argument, because very little in this franchise is realistic. For me, I prefer the 2018 version not only because I like badass women with guns, but because it can work in the proper scenario. It doesn't work very well in 2018 because the filmmakers made the retarded decision to have Michael get caught in 1978 and be incarcerated for 40 years. It's like, yeah, the guy who tried to kill you is still alive, and there's a possibility he could get out, but would it fit with the Laurie we get in 2018? I think this movie, H2O, had the perfect setup for the Sarah Connor ripoff Laurie because they took the idea of Michael not being caught 20 years, and it would make sense that Laurie might want to be prepared should death come knocking on her door because he's still out there somewhere. Regardless, we have PTSD Laurie for this film, but she does eventually fight back, and for me, this last act is the best part of the movie. Laurie's kicking ass, and her first face-to-face with Michael was iconic in a way, but it's kind of ruined by this fucking mask. What happened to this mask? It looks so cheap, and seeing Michael's eyes, especially when he opens them wide, looks so stupid. I'm sorry, what did Loomis say in the original Halloween?
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
Right. The blackest eyes my ass. Why didn't they stick with the mask in the opening scene? Who knows, and honestly, who cares? Aside from the final act, this movie actually bored me. The suspense was average at best, the portrayal of Michael was not as intimidating as previous incarnations, and most of the characters were forgettable, and honestly, I'm ready to move on to the next crapfest. There are a couple of noteworthy characters. I did enjoy LL Cool J. He was pretty funny as always, plus I loved him in Deep Blue Sea, so I guess that's something. We also have a cameo from Jamie's mother, Janet Leigh. I think she's also driving the car from Psycho, which is a nice Easter egg considering the original Halloween was very much inspired by Psycho. Okay, let's talk about the ending. So after Laurie supposedly defeats Michael, we see they put his body in an ambulance. And we know what's going to happen. Michael has survived so much at this point, and it's very unlikely he died this time. But then, we get thrown a curveball. Laurie steals the ambulance at gunpoint and drives off. As Michael begins waking up, she crashes the car, and Michael gets pinned between the vehicle and a tree trunk. Laurie and Michael then begin touching hands, which is weird. Why is Laurie getting emotional with Michael as if she's about to put down a loved one? Did she forget that this guy killed her friends and tried to kill her too? She doesn't care in the end because she cuts his goddamn head off. As far as conclusive deaths go, this would be the second best. Obviously, you can't get any more dead than burning to a cinder, but who cares? Michael's dead, Laurie lives happily ever after despite all the murder and mayhem. All is well that ends pointless, I guess, and we can finally say goodnight to the Halloween franchise. Wait.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
Halloween Resurrection. Remember in the previous review I stated that Scream paved the way for more shitty Halloween sequels? Well, this film is a result of that. Ironically, Halloween Resurrection would also be responsible for paving the way for another series of questionable films with the Halloween name. So, what happened? Why did this sequel even get made? Did Michael not die? Again? If burning to a crisp wasn't a solid death, surely a decapitation would if you're not immortal. Well, Resurrection has an answer for that. The movie opens up with Laurie Strode in a mental institution. It turns out that Michael pulled a curse of Michael Myers' producer's cut and switched costumes with a paramedic. He injured the guy's throat to the point that he couldn't speak, then switched outfits. Thus, the coroners picked up the unconscious paramedic dressed as Michael, which then led to Laurie decapitating him. Now, if this explanation sounds convoluted and ridiculous, then congratulations, you're smarter than this movie's writers. For the longest time, I thought this explanation was just a rushed decision made so that we could have another Michael Myers sequel. But something happened in my most recent viewing of Halloween H2O. Now observe, as Michael is waking up, notice how he grabs at his face. It's as if Michael, quote unquote, is confused as to why there's a mask on his face. At first I thought this was just something from Resurrection, but I don't think it is. So it appears that they've had this bullshit twist planned from the start. The filmmakers most likely never planned on ending the series with H2O. They knew they could still milk the Michael Myers cow for a few extra bucks. And just how in the hell did they think having this plot twist was going to work or make any sense? Why wouldn't Michael just disappear like he usually does? Why didn't he just kill the paramedic and switch costumes? What was the point? The paramedics and coroners thought Michael was dead already, so if they checked the pulse of the body, they would have realized he isn't dead. Oh boy, I'm overthinking it, guys. This movie is too incompetent for these little things, which aren't actually little if you consider the fact that this opening sets up the rest of this ridiculous plot. And why in God's name did they decide to unmask the head of who was supposed to be Michael after they find the head instead of loading him up into the coroner's van? All this crap makes about as much sense as me calling a fucking coroner's van an ambulance. Seriously, I called the fucking coroner's van an ambulance! So after Laurie supposedly defeats Michael, we see they put his body in an ambulance. So ever since that night, Laurie's been silent while being in a mental institution. Funny enough, all of this is an interesting parallel to Michael and the time he spent at Smith's Grove. Recall back to what Dr. Loomis said about Michael staring out the window, and a nurse in this movie saying a similar line.
I watched him for 15 years, sitting in a room, staring at a wall, not seeing the wall, looking past the wall, looking at this night, inhumanly patient.
No, all she does is stare out that window. God knows what she sees out there.
Despite all the BS that will come up in this film, this opening is the most interesting part, minus the costume switch of the paramedic, and a few other things. We even get a little callback from the original Halloween, where Laurie's looking out her window, sees Michael standing there, and then he disappears. This is where the finale of Laurie's story in this original series crescendos. Laurie has been at this mental institution since 1998, and now Michael's found her. The next few scenes feature Michael stalking and killing. Some of the suspense is decent. It has some proper build-up. It also has the cliche jump scare from another character wearing a mask before the real killer shows up. We've seen this countless times in other slashers, so they're sticking with the formula, which can be good and bad. Regardless, it turns out that Laurie was waiting for Michael. This was all a trap in an effort to end him for good. She lures him up to the roof and catches him on a hang rope by his foot. As he dangles there, Laurie picks up the knife and starts monologuing. She then asks Michael if he's afraid to die, and starts cutting the rope to have Michael fall to his death. Okay, why would she think the fall would kill him? This bastard has survived being shot, falling off a balcony, being caught in an explosion, burning to a cinder. What more can be done? But Michael pulls a clever trick. He starts grabbing at his mask in a similar way to how the paramedic grabbed at the mask, and this gives Laurie a moment of doubt, which ends up costing her a life. But something doesn't add up here. I get the idea that this would fool Laurie, but how would Michael know to do this? I mean, I suppose he could have read a newspaper or seen a report about what happened and pulled this move with the knowledge of the 1998 incident, but we don't see this, and the only other logical explanation is that Michael witnessed the killing. The thing is, we don't see this either, so at this point, we're just filling in the blanks for the writers, which is not a very good idea, but who cares at this point? 8 movies in, who really cares about the continuity? So as Laurie gets in close to unmask Michael, he grabs her, and as the rope breaks and they fall, Michael stabs Laurie. They have a good long look at each other, and Laurie kisses her brother on the lips. Okay, yeah, I'm not even going into that shit. I think I've seen enough incest in the Myers family to last a lifetime. She tells Michael that she'll see him in hell as she falls to her death. And this is the last we see of Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode until 2018. Michael walks into the room of the mental patient that was wearing the clown mask and gives him the knife for some reason. Michael walks off and the clown guy starts spitting out facts of Michael's history, and we get the Halloween theme play as Michael walks down the tunnel. Then we get our title card. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you, but I actually like this opening aside from the BS body swap stuff. It has some nice callbacks to the original film and actually makes Michael feel scary again. What helps sell this is Michael's mask. Yeah, we still see his eyes, but with that said, it has a real mean look to it. I think that this mask is one of my favorites, and the performer does a good enough job. It was a bold move to kill Laurie off so early, and that in and of itself is a nice callback to Jamie's mother Janet Leigh, whose character in Psycho was killed off early in the movie. All things considered, this is a solid opening. I wish the rest of this movie was solid, but some good moments in shit films don't make movies good. Funny enough, this will be a running theme I have going forward in these reviews. And mind you, it's not like I went into these movies ready to dislike them. It's just the filmmakers had plenty of opportunities to do this franchise right, and they just pissed it all away. Regardless of all that, and with the opening out of the way, what about the rest of the movie? Well, the gist of it is that an entertainment company called Dangertainment is setting up a kind of reality TV show where some people are going to investigate the old Myers house, Ghost Adventure style, and then get the piss scared out of them. 6 people are chosen, and funny enough, I actually recognize a couple faces. The first is someone that Star Wars fans will remember. That is Katie Sackhoff from The Mandalorian. Huh, never thought I'd see Bo-Katan take on Michael Myers. The other is a little more obscure, but I remember her from one of my favorite comedy shows, Psych. This is Bianca Kajlik? Jesus, that's one hell of a last name. Anyways, we also get introduced to the host of this Myers House event, Freddie Harris and Nora Winston, played by Busta Rhymes and Tyra Banks. Well, you've got no other star power left in the original cast of Halloween, so I guess it's time to bring in the celebrities. I wonder if their presence in this film helped with the box office a bit. Who cares? So we see our group meet up and discuss what this little event will entail, and we see the characters give individual interviews. The most noteworthy one is the character Bill, played by Thomas Ian Nicholas. The reason this is the most noteworthy interview is because of this line.
I just want to say that Michael Myers is not just a man behind a mask. He's a legend.
It's a nice little reference to Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 6, with the song The Man Behind the Mask from Alice Cooper.
Almighty's back. He's the man behind the mask.
Anyways, the setup we have here is all the people going into the house are wearing cameras, and this show is being broadcasted on the internet. The late 90s and early 2000s had a huge surge in found footage and POV horror. Movies like The Blair Witch Project, REC, and Cloverfield are a few of the most popular examples. This movie is definitely a product of its time. Remember how I said H2O felt like Scream? Well, I'd say that Resurrection here is even more like Scream. And aside from a couple moments in the movie, Halloween Resurrection is the one film in this franchise so far that feels the most disconnected from the overall Halloween franchise. The suspense and atmosphere of the movie is nowhere near what John Carpenter was able to invoke. Also, the camera angles, look of the movie itself, and the characters all feel like Scream. This may just be because of the advancement of technology at the time, but that said, I still can't shake the feeling of familiarity. And if you like this look and feel of Scream, don't let me ruin it for you. Just try to understand my point of view. As a fan of these films, I don't want to see different franchises look and feel the same way. When I watch Friday the 13th, I expect cheesy acting, over-the-top special effects, and something to have dumb fun with. When I watch Halloween, I expect a good amount of fear and suspense, with a terrifying immortal killer. One of the problems with Resurrection is that it handles Myers in 2 ways. One is how we expect him to be, scary and intimidating. The other way is with comedy. I mean, when we see Michael come face to face with Busta Rhymes in a Michael Myers costume and he starts screaming at Michael, I would have expected him to waste the imposter without a second thought. But he just walks away. This conflict of tone is one of the reasons I become annoyed with modern films. Sometimes the filmmakers want us to feel a certain way, but then they inject something else into it that throws off how we're supposed to feel. Let's break it down. Whether it's horror movies or something like superhero films, the filmmakers insert bits of comedy in tense and stressful situations to alleviate pressure and let the audience breathe. In the case of horror films, it's necessary because if the whole movie is nothing but scary with no breaks in between, then the next scare won't be as effective. Many horror films do this and do it well enough. With that said, there are moments where these films will insert a bit of comedy that would either throw off a scene or a character. In the case of Resurrection, what we have seen so far with Michael is that he is dangerous and a force to be reckoned with. There is no comedy with him. Michael isn't like Freddy Krueger with cracking jokes or even talking for that matter. He's a silent and intimidating killer. So, Resurrection decides that it wants to change that. We get this scene with Busta Rhymes dressed as Michael to scare people in the house. Obviously, this isn't the first time we've seen a Michael Myers imposter. As he moves through the home, the real Michael is walking behind him. Now, in most cases, this is the point where the imposter character meets a grisly end. But instead, this happens.
You been at, man? Don't you know we've been looking all over this motherfucker for you? And why the hell you dressed like me anyway? I ain't paying you to be Michael Myers like that for. Huh? You don't get it? You don't get it? Your shit ain't working up there or something? I left the back door unlocked for your ass to go out the back into the garage. That's what I did. You need to get the hell out of here. Go ahead, scoot, skedaddle. Get the fuck out of Dodge.
Not only did Busta Rhymes get away with screaming at Michael, but he got away with repeatedly tapping him on the forehead. And as I said earlier, Michael just walks away. How exactly am I supposed to feel about Michael at this point? This conflict of tone and character lessens my enjoyment of this movie. As a Halloween fan with a great respect for the original film, this movie is the most removed in the franchise. At least the other entries took Michael and the stories seriously. Halloween Resurrection is the one film that feels more like a horror comedy than a straight-up horror film with comedic elements. With that said, I do find this scene funny in isolation, and Busta Rhymes is really the only entertaining aspect to this movie. But I wouldn't recommend anyone watch it. The other characters aside from Sarah are bland and uninspired, just more generic nobodies to get killed off in gruesome ways. Sarah is basically this movie's Laurie Strode. She's our final girl and does a good job all things considered. She shines the best in the final act of the film, but more on that later. The soundtrack is average at best. I sort of like the new rendition of the classic Halloween theme. With that said, the rest of the music is dull. Gone are the days where you have a genuine and creepy scene of two characters simply talking. I say that Dr. Loomis talking about Michael Myers to Sheriff Brackett in the original Halloween is one of the most effective scenes of expositional dialogue with unnerving music.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes. The devil's eyes.
The best way to sum up this movie is that it's a Halloween parody. It uses familiar elements from the franchise that it's in and makes jokes out of legacy characters. It's similar to how they portrayed the Terminators in Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, though as far as making jokes of legacy characters go, Rise of the Machines does it worse. I would say that the best this film has to offer is in the third act. When every one of the original 6 are dead except Sarah, she's at the mercy of Michael. However, because the broadcast is live, Sarah's getting help from a friend of hers. They communicate through her phone, and these scenes do feel genuinely scary and intense. There's some proper suspense, and it was pretty entertaining. The ending fight is also noteworthy entertaining, but in a cheap way. And we get one of the most ridiculous but funny lines that a horror film could offer.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
These kinds of one-liners and catchphrases are more reasons why I say it's more like Scream than Halloween. It's the kind of thing an 80s action hero would say. It gets even more silly like a slapstick comedy when Busta Rhymes starts pulling some kung fu moves with all the accompanying sounds.
You got.
As they have their final fight in the shed, Michael gets shocked in the balls. Again, slapstick comedy. The shed catches on fire and Busta with Sarah on his back escape while Michael is left to burn. This is the second time Michael has been caught on fire. It's almost as if the filmmakers remember that's how he actually died in Halloween 2, and so they want to use it again. The shed is completely burned down. Buster and Sarah are okay, and they take Michael's body away. So we get a shot of seeing Michael in a body bag.
something very familiar about all this.
They take his body to a morgue and we get one last look at his face, and then his eyes open and we cut to black. Wow, another BS cliffhanger. You know, it doesn't matter how many times you burn this SOB, you can't kill the boogeyman. Or we should call him...
Looking a little crispy over there, Mikey. Like some chicken fried, motherfucker.
Well, we made it to the end, ladies and gentlemen. With Halloween Resurrection over, we've reached the conclusion of the original Halloween series. Well, until this... But we'll see that one soon enough down the road. Here we have yet another example of how far Halloween had fallen from that fantastic indie film from 1978. This movie bombed so bad that the cliffhanger we got at the end would never see a sequel. Instead, we would get a reboot. Yes, that reboot.
What the hell is this?
Yes, indeed. What the hell is this? There's so much to say about this movie, and it won't be unanimous praise. So grab your strongest drinks, Rob Zombie fans, because you're going to need it after watching this review. Believe me. Rob Zombie's Halloween. Okay, first question. Out of all the movies to remake, why in God's name did you have to remake Halloween? Did it need a remake? No. If you wanted to remake Halloween, why not remake one of the shitty sequels? It's just as bad as when they remade A Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, some of what people say in defense of this movie is that I shouldn't compare this film to the original, and I should think of it as its own thing.
You serious?
No. If it bears the name Halloween and features a white mask killer named Michael Myers who stalks a babysitter named Laurie Strode, then it can't be its own thing, and I will judge it as I have judged every other film in this franchise. Plus, if Rob Zombie's Halloween is its own thing, why does it sit proudly in the Blu-ray box sets? If it's supposed to be its own thing, why call it Halloween and reuse story beats and characters from the original series? Why not do your own slasher killer movie? Sorry, kids, but the filmmakers intended this movie to be Halloween, and that's how we will treat it. So after establishing that this movie's first mistake is existing, what else does this movie fuck up on? How about we start with the movie's main villain? No. Not that one. God damn it, not that asshole. Ah, there we are. Can we even call this kid Michael Myers? I can't. This character is anything but that silent mask killer that defined an entire genre of cinema. This version of Michael is so far removed from how we understood him to be in the original film, I can only see him as a completely different character. Kinda reminds me of something else.
So I almost had to think of Luke as another character. Maybe he's Jake Skywalker. He's not my Luke Skywalker.
So you Rob Zombie fanboys are probably wondering what's wrong with this theoretical Michael Myers. Well, let's start with the opening of this film for context.
Somebody around here's got to make some money.
I'm all broken up here, bitch. I can't work.
Yeah, and whose fault is that? Oh my God, you're pathetic. Oh, whore with the big tits hanging down to her knees?
Maybe I'll choke the chicken, purge my snorkel all over them flappy ass tits.
Good, we'll have a good fucking time.
I will.
I hope she likes cripples.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you.
Mom. Can't you see I'm making eggs over here? Yes. Since when? Don't you give me that look!
Man, that bitch got herself a nice little dumper. Man, that bitch got herself a nice little dumper.
Michael, stop jerking off in there.
Get away!
Hey, get your ass downstairs and wash your hands, you little shit. I'm not listening!
How cliche! How does one become a killer? Why, of course, a broken and dysfunctional Brady Bunch, featuring crippled Billy Goat, Strip Mom, Elvis Fan, Not Laurie Strode, and Emo Pennywise. Now, some of you are probably thinking to yourself that this one aspect has been critiqued to death, and it's only one part of the movie. Well, understand this. The opening to a horror movie, specifically a Halloween movie, has an important job of setting the stage for the rest of the plot. When handling a legacy character, there should be some proper respect for him or her. Michael Myers was never meant to be a cheesy, cliche-filled slasher villain. Though I don't blame Rob Zombie for this particular seed of bullshit was planted in Halloween 4, and it didn't stop there. In the original, Michael's backstory is left very vague with little details spread throughout the movie. One of the biggest strengths in Halloween 78 was how it told us about Michael. Through the use of expositional dialogue, a fantastic performance by Donald Pleasance, and an amazing score from John Carpenter, the audience was told everything we needed to know. Michael's childhood was not important. It was just that infamous night on Halloween in 1963. It was a simple means to get the plot moving. While the Carpenter film kept things short and to the point, Rob Zombies had to spell it out for us in great length because I guess it's too hard for the audience to understand short and sweet. Getting past the white trash family scene, we're shown another typical plot point of the soon-to-be serial killer being bullied at school. After he gets into a little scuffle with these two shitheads, the school principal has a chat with Mrs. Myers. And here's where we get introduced to Dr. Loomis, played by Malcolm McDowell. As a quick side note, Malcolm is a fantastic actor, though I say that this version of Loomis is average at best. When you've seen a legendary actor portray a character for so many years, it's hard to imagine anyone else in the role. Call it a bias or showing favoritism, the thing is that Halloween never needed a remake. If you got to the point that you felt it necessary to remake Halloween, especially after a slew of bland sequels, maybe it's time to put the Halloween book back on the shelf and leave it be. But I digress. As the scene goes on, Dr. Loomis explains that Michael's behavior, along with the killing of small animals, is a sign of a future serial killer. God, I swear it's like the filmmakers are holding the hands of the audience to explain what makes a serial killer and how Michael is slowly becoming one. Let us compare two scenes for this plot point.
Are you saying Michael did this? Michael loves animals. Why would he do this?
Mrs. Myers, typically the thrill of hurting or causing pain to smaller creatures, it's often an early warning sign.
Early warning sign for what?
For much deeper and bigger problems.
What do you mean problems? What is this?
He's a very disturbed young man. I have to evaluate him, and I'd like to interview him. I need to take him through a series of tests.
Yeah, I am. I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Let's break down exactly what's going on here. Both scenes feature the same character delivering expositional dialogue about Michael Myers. Given what we know about Dr. Loomis in the original film, we understand that he had been working with Michael for a long time now. In that time, Dr. Loomis began to understand on some level what he was dealing with. The dialogue is very personal and direct in the case of Michael Myers. Michael wasn't some serial killer in the making. He simply snapped. I actually have a little fan theory about this, but I'll get into that later. The point is that Dr. Loomis in the original was talking about a specific individual. This scene isn't a lecture point explaining what makes a serial killer. It was a setup to give context to a character we knew frighteningly little about. Compare this now with the Rob Zombie film. We are shown quite a bit in the evidence department with several pictures of dead animals in Michael's possession, as well as animal corpses. Accompanying this is the expositional dialogue given by Loomis. Now, putting aside the fact that I absolutely despise how much information we are getting about Michael when it should be left in mystery, the issue with what's being said is that it doesn't feel like a doctor sharing his personal feelings about an individual. It feels more like he took a snippet from a criminal justice book and regurgitated it. It felt too formal and lacked in chilling feelings and ominous atmosphere. Put simply, the Rob Zombie scene felt generic, boring, and uninspired. It played by the numbers and was very predictable for a doctor to say. Dr. Loomis in the original was terrified of Michael Myers because he wasn't driven by relatable or understandable human behavior. He was like a ghost with no emotion or sense of being. This is the reason I believe the ending credits refer to him as the Shape. Many fans of this film, some of who are my friends, and probably you watching right now, wonder why I don't like this version of Michael Myers, who I will lovingly call Jake Myers from here on out. Right here in the beginning is where it starts. We see Michael as some overly animated kid who is very talkative and normal, all things considered, aside from the animal killings and dysfunctional family. As the movie goes on, we eventually see him snap. He has mental breakdowns with screaming and throwing tantrums. This right here feels so disconnected from the Michael we know. And this is probably the point where you'll say that I need to stop thinking of this like the classic film. Here's the problem. One, I can't because of the reasons I already stated in the beginning. Two, even these scenes in the beginning make Michael feel disconnected from his older self later in this film. If this film is trying to convince me that this kid will become a giant mute with no screaming and such, well, until the sequel, of course, then it's not doing a good job. In the original, the first time we see Michael is very brief, and we don't see his face again until the end. We only have one clear and brief picture of how Michael was from a kid to an adult. The next we see of him is as an adult, so the disconnect from one point to another isn't as present. In fact, I would say there is no disconnect in the original because what we don't see of young Michael is explained by Loomis, and at that point, we are told everything we need to understand about Michael's behavior. Another point of defense that people will say is that if you skip the opening 40 minutes of the film, you'll start seeing familiar elements from the original, and so use this justification for why this movie is good. And I'd like to dive into this. You see, when there's a remake of a classic film, it doesn't always work out in the favor of the remake. Let's look at the remakes for Psycho and A Nightmare on Elm Street. From what I could find, there was almost unanimous hate for these films. For Psycho, they reshot the entire film scene for scene. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a little different, but still bullshit at the same time. In fact, I would say it's a lot like Halloween. Both feature extra scenes and or lines of dialogue that give extra information and context about the main villain, and they even reshoot classic scenes but somehow make it feel cheaper. It's almost like cheap fan service. Cheap fan service like this.
There is something else. When the big man was killed, you must have wanted it. Its blood was on the leaves.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
I don't know that this thing can be killed.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
And here's the problem with justifying the quality of your movie by how it's similar to the original. Because your movie is a remake and not a sequel, you telling me that your movie has scenes just like the original will only make me ask the question of, then why don't I just go watch the original instead of a movie that I overall do not like just because it has scenes that play on my emotional investment of a better film? It's a different case if we're talking about a sequel because at that point, it can't easily be labeled as pure fan service if it's used properly. There could be many elements at play if a sequel calls back to something that happened in the previous film in the franchise. But since we're talking about a remake and not a sequel, my thoughts will be more critical than praiseworthy. Yes, the scenes of Michael stalking Laurie in this film make sense because of the context of both characters' personal relationship with each other, but that said, just because it makes sense doesn't mean it's good. For example, I can justify the reshoots of classic scenes from the original Nightmare on Elm Street because of what we understand about Freddy Krueger and his abilities in the dream world. That doesn't mean that they're good. At the end of the day, it was a shameless, uninspired mess of a remake that lacked the soul of the original and what actually made it good. Funny enough, these are similar views that I have about this movie. Okay. I think you guys have had enough ass whooping for now, so let's get into some positives. Is it weird when I think of a movie that I don't like, the one thing I can enjoy is a single actor? Maybe, but I suppose finding one thing in something I don't like is better and or more productive than a complete displeasure. Granted, this one actor doesn't save the film overall, but that said, I can appreciate the performance regardless. Scout Taylor Compton. This wonderful woman is the only reason I would watch these imitator Halloween films. Why? Well, it's hard to explain, but I'll do the best that I can. First, let me get this straight. I still prefer Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode because she's the only Laurie Strode. Just like Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger and Tony Todd as Candyman, Laurie Strode belongs to Jamie. And because I don't see this as an actual Halloween film, I don't see Scout as Laurie Strode. And that's not a negative. I find Scout Taylor Compton to be a good actor, and she plays the role of a high school teenager very well. Her acting feels fitting for the time period this film is set in. I see people criticize Jamie's Laurie as being too mature or unbelievable for a high school student. Okay, I'm gonna knock this BS criticism out right away. You can't sit there and say Laurie is too mature or unbelievable for a high school student because no one high school student is the same. Not every high school student is a morally immature shithead. Hell, I personally knew students in my old high school that were similar to Laurie Strode in the aspect of being mature for such a young age. At the same time, you guys need to understand the time period. More often than not, many forget that people of certain time periods are the way they are based on societal and cultural norms. There are different kinds of people with certain behavior traits, so you may think that Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode is too mature for a teen, but the reality is that a high schooler like that version of Laurie is a logical possibility.
Horror has, I'll say a word about horror. Horror has been with cinema since the very beginning. It grew up part and parcel with the image, with cinema. And it will always be with us. It's one of the most popular genres of all time. And it's an all-purpose genre because it keeps changing. Every culture, every few years, it morphs, it changes into something else. It brings the sensibilities of the age in which it's made, that's what's so fabulous. If you look at Frankenstein or Dracula or The Bride of Frankenstein, the Karloff films that were made at this studio, they're very much of the 30s and the Depression. They're Depression-era movies. They're speaking to those audiences. Well, if you look at modern horror films, they're speaking to you guys. And they bring the sensibility that you've become used to seeing and you demand seeing in film.
Of course, if you prefer Scout's Laurie, then I'll tell it to you like I told you in my H2O review. Just say you prefer that version because of personal taste. Don't come up with some weird excuses like unrealistic or too mature. It may feel off for you as someone watching this movie years after it came out, but it felt right enough for many people back then. With that said, Scout does a good job of being terrified. I don't have much to complain about when it comes to Scout, as I find her to be the best part of the movie. Another character I find decent is Annie, played by our favorite Myers niece Danielle Harris. I think that Scout and Danielle work very well together, and this part actually gets better in the sequel. Too bad such a good character bond is in such a shit film.
My little pony, my little pony.
There's one more positive I would like to discuss. It's the look and brutality of Michael. Now, putting aside the fact that I don't like Michael's origin story, I do think the mask is really cool. The weathered look of the mask is a nice touch. Tyler Mane also makes Michael feel like a force to be reckoned with. Unlike the stupid scene with Michael and Busta Rhymes, this version of Michael is taking shit from no one. So, unfortunately for you Rob Zombie fans, this is about as much positive as I could squeeze out from this film. With that said, let's get into some more problems. Remember in my previous reviews I made the point that we, as the audience, have been oversaturated with Michael Myers? Well, this movie, like its predecessors, has the exact same issue, but put into one film. Not only was seeing Michael's origin as a killer in great and painful detail a hindrance to the film, but seeing him so damn much flat out kills the mystique and suspense that the original film had built up. One of the biggest strengths of the original was how it was sparing with what you had seen of Michael. Throughout the film, what we would see of Michael was brief shots. With the exception of the scene where he was stalking Tommy Doyle, you couldn't get the best look at him. In fact, with that very scene, you never see his face. Seeing the white mask was always at a distance. It wasn't until we get towards the climax of the film that we get better looks of him. It's the complete opposite with the Rob Zombie film. It seems that the filmmakers couldn't stand the idea of us not seeing the big bastard in near full view when the opportunity arose. Add on to this is the opening 40 minutes of the film giving us a fully explained backstory of how Michael went bad, and you can understand me when I say that we get oversaturated with Michael Myers in just this film alone. There's another problem with Jake Myers that I see many people not really care about, or at least not find it as much of a problem. Recall back to my H2O review where I addressed people's comments about realism in this franchise. Well, there are those that say they prefer this version of Michael Myers, who is Jake Myers, because he's more realistic. Once again, I have to address this comment of realism. The Halloween franchise was never about realism. Obviously, these are movies, and things will inevitably be exaggerated. The original film was the closest to realistic that you would get in this franchise. The thing is, though, that even then it wasn't realistic or ever meant to be. When Dr. Loomis shoots Michael 6 times and falls off a balcony, it's over. No mortal person can survive these shots unless, of course, he was wearing, say, body armor. But there's no hint of this, no clues left behind by the filmmakers to suggest he had stolen an armor vest. After all, The only information we have about Michael stealing anything is in this scene.
What happened?
What?
What happened?
Oh, somebody broke into the hardware store. Probably kids.
You blame everything on kids.
Well, now all they took was some Halloween mask, rope, and a couple of knives.
When Loomis looks over the balcony to see Michael gone, suddenly the perspective changes. The atmosphere is different, and we as the audience begin to question everything we have seen and heard. The way John Carpenter handled Michael Myers was through limited perception and lack of lengthy detail. Michael's backstory was sparing on information. I would say this was done on purpose because whoever Michael was before Halloween night, 1963, was no longer relevant. The Michael that was known is now gone and replaced with the Shape. At the end of John Carpenter's Halloween, we knew on some level that Michael was supernatural. We get hints of this throughout the film. The most obvious is when Loomis is speaking to Sheriff Brackett in the Myers house. Another aspect is when Laurie's in class and the teacher is talking about fate.
Costain wrote that fate was somehow related only to religion, whereas Samuels felt that, well, fate was like a natural element, like earth, air, fire, and water.
That's right. Samuels definitely personified fate. In Samuel's writing, fate is immovable, like a mountain. It stands where man passes away. Fate never changes.
One of the biggest problems with how Halloween handled Michael after the first film was that they changed what he was and what he represented. The John Carpenter film treated the Shape as an unstoppable, unrelenting force of nature. The whole brother-sister angle and the Cult of Thorn were not factored, relevant, or existent in the first film. Unfortunately, the Rob Zombie film took these additions and changes to the next level. Rob Zombie's Jake Myers is the embodiment of missing the point in regards to Michael Myers. But don't take my word for it. Listen to the man himself.
But you asked me about Rob Zombie's movie. Well, I would say nice things about him, but you know, we did this. I thought it was going to be a real cool deal for the History Channel, the Biography Channel, whatever that is. They were going to do about Halloween. I thought, ooh, that's pretty cool. Until I noticed that they did one on Caddyshack. And I thought, wow, what is this? Anyway, they interviewed him on that biography channel, and he lied about me. He said I was very cold to him when he told me I was going to, and that he was going to make it. Nothing could be further from the truth. I said, make it your own movie, man. You know, this is yours now. Don't worry about me. I was incredibly supportive. Why that piece of shit lied, I don't know. He had no reason to. Why did he do it? So, frankly, that will color my response to the film. If I take that away, I did not. I thought that he took away the mystique of the story by explaining too much about the guy. I don't care about that. It's supposed to be a force of nature. He's supposed to be almost supernatural. Knowing about that and he was too big.
Yeah.
It wasn't normal. Anyway.
If I could sum up my issues with Jake Myers, it's this. They made who was supposed to be Michael Myers, aka The Shape, more human. He's less like a supernatural threat and more like a typical serial killer we've seen in so many 80s slasher films that mooched off the success of Halloween and Friday the 13th. Giving such an extensive backstory to a character that didn't need it is what ruins this portrayal. Jake Myers here feels more like a knockoff Jason Voorhees than Michael Myers. Something I do want to address is something my good friend and fellow HalloScreamer Bacon Pew Pew said about the original Halloween. In his review for the original film, he said that this movie is not for everybody. And he's absolutely right. I've come to the conclusion that many fans of the Rob Zombie film are of the generation that didn't grow up with the original and or watched his version first instead of the Carpenter film. Because of this, people will start generating opinions like, this movie is cheesy, this movie is boring, or this isn't a proper horror movie. Many horror movies these days feature elements, tropes, and cliches that appeal to a less focused audience. These days, most audiences only like big spectacles, adrenaline-pumped action, and awesome special effects. In the case of horror films, it's all about the blood, gore, violence, and nudity. Very few horror films these days are actually powered by the story. Now, while John Carpenter has certainly made some gory films in his time,
Fuck you too!
He understood the importance of having a compelling story with good written characters for the audience to connect with. For me, Rob Zombie's film is Halloween in name only. Take away the familiar elements of what we know to be Halloween, and what you're left with is another Rob Zombie horror film. Halloween is not a Rob Zombie franchise. Rob Zombie's style of filmmaking doesn't fit with what Halloween always was. It doesn't help that the Halloween sequels departed from what the first movie was meant to be as well. Rob Zombie's films are merely following what examples the lackluster sequels set going forward. Well, if you made it to the end, Rob Zombie fans, congrats. For those who know me personally, now you can get a better perspective as to why I don't like the Rob Zombie films. Of course, we haven't even talked about the sequel to this Halloween movie in name only.
Oh yes. Shite.
Be my victim. Be my victim. Be
My Little Pony.
what? Be my little pony. What are you talking about? Be my little new miracle. No. Please. Please don't say that. My little pony. We have problems. When people have problems, they work it out. They talk to each other. Be my little new miracle. Oh, shit.
How can I put this properly? What can I say about this movie that isn't just the equivalent of curse words on an assembly line? Well, let's start with this. If the first film isn't even a Halloween movie, then this one isn't even close to a Halloween movie. It's in another state. No, it's so far from a Halloween movie that it's on an entire different continent. Rob Zombie's not even sort of Halloween 2. To those of you that like Jake Myers here for being more realistic than Michael Myers, I'm still waiting for a proper explanation for how he survived getting dirty harried at point blank range. But you know what? Realistic flew out the damn window when these bastards showed up. So, just like the first film, the movie has an opening text. Funny enough, this little bit is apparently supposed to explain the appearance of the physical manifestation of my nightmares. What exactly is so awesome about this fucking white horse and strip mom? You know, almost everyone I talk to says it's good and important to the story. The problem is that this white horse BS is not even relevant to the first film because it wasn't even in it. When the opening shows this scene of strip mom talking to not Jake Myers, we see this white horse. The opening text says that the white horse is linked to the drive of the physical body to release emotions like rage. As for the link between Jake Myers and Carter's fantasy spirit animal, clearly the filmmakers are doing what I criticized the first movie for. If getting a bland, generic, and cookie-cutter explanation for why Jake Myers kills wasn't annoying enough, this white horse BS puts the cherry on top of this shit cake. Needless to say, this isn't Halloween, and it's not even close to being a Halloween movie. It's not even a parody. This movie truly is its own thing. But it still uses Halloween elements, some of which piss me off more than the bastardization of Michael Myers himself. So the white horse is a thing, and Jake keeps seeing this monstrosity along with the occasional visit from Ghost Strip Mom and weird Jake Doppelganger Myers. As the opening continues, we pick up at the end of the first film and we see Scout walking down the street looking like Carrie after the prom dance. Sheriff Chucky finds her and tries to calm her down. We then see Annie screaming into the hospital. And this is something interesting that the first film did, to let Annie survive. In a way, I'm a little glad they did this, as her and Scout's relationship is the most solid aspect of the first film. And this relationship does grow in more depth, which is nice. It's also the most gut-wrenching because this time around, Annie is not so lucky as Jake Myers finishes what he started.
And I will finish what you started.
This right here is the only good scene in this mess of a movie. It's the one good aspect that had proper build-up. Scout comes home to find Annie dead in a pool of her own blood, and Scout's reaction is fantastic. You can feel her pain in her voice and facial expressions. I said in the previous review that Scout's acting is fantastic, and I believe that this film builds on that a bit with just this scene alone. After what she's been through in the previous movie and surviving her encounter with Jake, seeing her trying to recover from it is a nice piece in her character arc. Though, depending on which version of the movie you're watching, you may either like it or hate it. Personally, I prefer the version where she's not such an ass, but that's just me. And speaking of ass, what in God's name did they do to Dr. Loomis? They made him a selfish, greedy prick. The Donald Pleasance Loomis was always concerned with the effects that Michael had on people. He knew that people would die as long as Michael was on loose, but this version here makes him the equivalent of Gale Weathers.
So, how's the book? Well, it'll be out later this year. Oh, I'll look for it. I'll send you a copy. Oh!
Jeez.
Alright, let's talk about the look of Jake Myers. From the perspective of the story being told here, it makes sense that Jake Myers looks like a hobo who's wearing a worn-out Halloween mask. He's been on the run for all intents and purposes since Halloween night. His beard is bushier, and his clothes are dirty and worn down, and from the context of the story, I can buy it. Here's the problem. This isn't Halloween. This is not Michael Myers. This oversized homeless dude is not the unstoppable force of nature that is evil incarnate. Jake Myers is not the boogeyman. What you Rob Zombie fans need to get through your heads is that what we are seeing here is not the character presented to us in 1978, which in all fairness, most of you probably already understand that. But by the very definition of the word used to describe what these movies are, a remake, it's a completely different character. My joke of Jake Myers isn't just a joke, it's an accurate description of what we're being given. All the elements presented in the first film to this one has humanized who is supposed to be Michael Myers. This is a complete contrast to the real Michael Myers. If you like Jake Myers, that's fine. Just don't call him Michael Myers as if he is a branch off of John Carpenter's The Shape. They are completely separate. The only elements that connect them are the names and similar events that shape who they become in the future. Do you understand what sets Michael Myers apart from, say, Jason Voorhees, the Ghostface Killers, Leatherface, or even Freddy Krueger? Unlike all of those icons who had very human origins that followed them into their present and more recognizable forms, Michael Myers had no relatable behavior. He wasn't driven by vengeance, family, or some sick, twisted desire to recreate the slasher plots of old. I said in the previous video that I had a fan theory about Michael Myers from the original John Carpenter film, and I want to get into that now. To put it in a simple format, I think that Michael Myers in John Carpenter's Halloween is possessed by an evil spirit or demon. Now, don't get this confused with Halloween 6's explanation, however similar it may seem. Like the movie itself, my idea is simple. At some point before Halloween night 1963, the little child known as Michael Myers was taken over by a demon. This demon, being in control of Michael, killed Judith, and after it was done, it relinquished control of Michael for the time being. Michael, being fully conscious about what had taken place, runs out of the house. When his parents arrive and take the mask off, we see Michael's in a state of shock. It's the kind of face one makes when they witness something terrible. Being put in a state of shock as a result of killing his own sister, he retreats into himself. He doesn't speak, nor does he do anything resembling life. He merely exists as a physical being occupying a space. It is because of this absence of consciousness that the demon that overtook him is now in full control. Michael Myers is merely a passenger in his own body. In an effort to reach the boy inside, Dr. Samuel Loomis is assigned to oversee the boy. As the years go by, Dr. Loomis begins to realize that a human being is not occupying the body he sees before him. He doesn't know exactly what it is, and in a way, the details of what it is doesn't matter. All Dr. Loomis knows is that what is lying behind the face of this human being is purely and simply evil. Something dark and malevolent is inside this boy, and he must never get back to the world as only carnage would lay in his wake. Come the night before Halloween 1978, the shape escapes its prison and seeks to go back to familiar territory, to the place where it first unleashed its unholy power. Some say that Michael going home and setting up the Judith Myers tombstone with Annie lying there is proof of motive. Obviously, most Halloween fans state that Michael Myers never had a real motive, or at least a relatable motive, like other slasher villains. I've heard some say that he does, based on the previously stated actions he does throughout the film. Here's my counterpoint. This demon, as evil and vile as one can expect, either through pride or familiarity, chose to come back to its origin. If it chose to come back to Haddonfield, it could be because it sought to torture the human being it possessed, that being Michael Myers. As far as evil spirits being evil is concerned, this is common behavior. Now, because it did successfully return home, it sought to continue its act of bloodshed. Enter Laurie Strode, a complete stranger with no significant importance or relevance to Michael Myers the human, nor the demon possessing him. Because the demon wants to kill, it chose Laurie to be its new victim. Its obsession, if you will. After killing others along the way, it finally has its hands on its obsession. But before it can kill the innocent virgin, Dr. Loomis shows up and stops it. Loomis shoots the shape 6 times and falls off the balcony. As Loomis looks over, he sees the shape is gone. But because we're not dealing with a mortal man, but with a demon, it survives, and it's still on the loose, proving that you can't kill the boogeyman. And to add the cherry on top, Loomis shoots him 6 times. Emphasis on the 6. Why? Because according to Christian mythology, 6 is the number of the devil. Whether it's devil or demon, the connection is obvious. The amazing thing about John Carpenter's film is that it leaves enough clues for the audience to be able to follow the basic plot of the story, while at the same time be able to come up with theories like this one I presented here. It's ironic that one of the worst Halloween movies ever made had a similar aspect to my theory. With that said, it still explained why Michael killed, specifically whereas mine kept the reason it killed in shadow. But I digress, as I'm theorizing about a better movie called Halloween. I said in my previous review that the focus of many modern horror films was on the blood and gore, and the story took a back seat for the most part. I find this to be very relevant in this film. Its kills are brutal, which, if that's your kick in horror films, then I'm sure you'll enjoy it. For me, I need the blood and gore to be complemented by the story. The blood and gore needs to be necessary for the story being told. Some of the kills feel gratuitous and over the top when it didn't need to be. Like the jackass coroner that killed Bruce Wayne's parents. That's right, this asshole did it.
Wallace, Joey, my fast, Joey.
It goes by that I don't wish I could take back what I did. Sure, I was desperate, like a lot of people back then, but that don't change what I did.
You know what? I take it back. This bastard deserved to die. Good job, Jake. If you boil it down, this movie is not for me. It's everything Halloween isn't. I know many of you love this movie, and to offer an olive branch to you Rob Zombie fans, there are good aspects to this film. With that in mind, like I stated in my previous reviews, good aspects and shit films don't make them good. If you want proof of this, just look at the previous Halloween sequels for reference. And to make sense of my feelings on these 2 Halloween films in name only, I'm not a Rob Zombie fan. I'm not a fan of his music nor his style of directing. If I was asked to watch some of his films with my friends in the HalloScream Review Series, sure, I'd do it. They would all be first-time watches, but other than that, I have no desire or incentive to watch them. If you like his movies, as I'm sure you do, then more power to you. If you like his idea of Halloween, enjoy to your heart's content. Just remember what old Spooky Clutter here said about your precious Jake Myers and his dysfunctional Brady Bunch. Halloween. Halloween. Oh, damn it! Halloween 2018. You know, why is it that filmmakers can't get creative with these names? I mean, we've got A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Godzilla, Halloween, Scream, and... oh, shit. Quick side note, go check out Danner's Dumpster, a new watch-along series here on the channel hosted by our very own Special Agent Danner Banner. The first episode featured this abomination.
Dana, can I talk to Dana?
There is no comedy, only cringe.
What a lovely singing voice you must have.
So 40 years after and an ass ton of mediocre to shit films later, we get a complete reboot of the whole timeline. What does this mean? Well, for starters, no bullshit Cult of Thorn, no brother-sister plot, no incest. If you guys recall, one of my biggest problems with every Halloween movie after the original, and excluding 3, it explained Michael's motives and made him less like this and more like this.
Wash your hands, you son of a bitch! Your mama was a snowblower! What? Your mama was a snowblower!
And the biggest question is, does Halloween 2018 get things back on track? Well, yes and no. From the standpoint of making Michael less human and more like a force of nature, yes and no here too. On one hand, Michael isn't shedding tears, he isn't talking, he's not trying to kill his sister. In this film, he's a killer, a brutal killer. On the other hand, the movie suffers from an issue that I mentioned in previous videos. Because this movie reboots everything after the first film, you'd think they would stick to the original ending as well. But you'd be wrong. Yes, they reboot everything, yet make a big mistake that affects Michael and his counterpart Laurie. Instead of having Michael disappear for 40 years, he's been incarcerated all this time. For 40 years, Michael's been locked up. He essentially regressed to how he was after he killed Judith in 1963, and 40 years is a long time. Now, how does this affect Laurie? Well, instead of moving on with her life and being normal, all things considered, she becomes Sarah Connor. I think I'll coin the term the Sarah Connor formula. Put in simple terms, have your female protagonist encounter a big bad in her first movie when she's younger, naive, and not ready for a proper stand-up fight. She survives her encounter and lives to see another movie where she is now a hardcore badass, taking shit from no one and is itching for battle. Technically, Ellen Ripley did this first in Alien. Then again, Ripley doing what she did in the first movie could be considered badass anyways. Regardless, we'll call it the Sarah Connor formula. So Laurie Strode has become a somewhat reclusive woman with an arsenal that would make Carter blush with excitement. She trained herself and her daughter in the ways of combat, and why, you might ask? Well, because Michael's been incarcerated for 40 years and he might get out again. Okay. In my review of H2O, I stated that Sarah Connor Laurie would make more sense in that film instead of this one, and the fact that Michael has been missing with no sightings in 20 years could make someone more self-aware of their surroundings and will want to learn self-defense. That's not to say it couldn't happen in the 2018 story, it just makes more sense in H2O. And mind you, I like the Sarah Connor formula. It's entertaining to see, especially when we get to this film's climax. With that in mind, it still doesn't fit quite right compared to how much better it would have fit if it was used in H2O. And just like Sarah Connor, Laurie can't forget the night that changed her life. Her obsession with Michael Myers drove her to the point where her own family all but disowned her, with the exception of her granddaughter Allison. And Allison here is our new Laurie Strode, as in she's the young high schooler who witnesses Michael's power firsthand. She loses her friends and comes face to face with pure evil. She's a decent character, all things considered, and she's definitely more likable than Laurie's son in H2O. Aside from Allison, the other characters are serviceable. I don't have too many complaints, but I will say the one annoying character that was a little distracting was the husband of Laurie's daughter. His scenes aren't that interesting, and his character is honestly forgettable. Okay, let's talk about the story and the additions made to the original Halloween. The biggest issue I have with this film is how they retconned the ending of the original film and had Michael get caught in 1978. Because this film rebooted everything after the original, they had an opportunity to do H2O's idea of Michael being MIA properly. Instead, they opted to have Michael stay locked up and he escapes again. This creative choice has a deeper meaning than some realize. Let me explain. After what I consider to be the turning point of the entertainment industry with the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm and by extension the rights to the Star Wars franchise, movie studios began getting this idea of bringing back old franchises by making a new film that could almost be considered a remake. Both studios, and more importantly fans, try to justify these choices by saying things like, this movie is a return to form, or this creative choice was necessary to bring the franchise back to its roots. Now look, you guys already know that I'm not a Rob Zombie Halloween fan. With that said, there was no other choice but to reboot the franchise. Personally, I would have just said leave Halloween alone and move on, but because Halloween Resurrection was one of the biggest dumpster fires that sunk the Halloween franchise, there was nothing left. The Rob Zombie films merely picked up the ashes of what was left of Halloween, and to their credit, they at least went down a different road and told their own story. Too bad they had to call it Halloween, but I digress. My point is that soft reboots are now becoming a reoccurring trend in film. Star Wars did it, Halloween did it, Ghostbusters did it, and Jesus Christ, Texas Chainsaw did it, unfortunately. For at least one of those franchises, it worked out with mainly positive reactions. With others, not so much. And unfortunately, Halloween is a mixed bag so far. This film feels like a Halloween movie, and at the same time, it feels odd. It has decent pacing, and the soundtrack is really good. It's just, some of the characters and plot points feel rehashed, and like a product of this time period, which sucks if I'm being honest. My generation and some of the younger generation in our culture are not as appealing as a decade like the 80s. Back then, the big trends were kick-ass music, action movies, slashers, and sweet hairstyles. These days, it's all about this bullshit.
At NATO,
diversity
is our strength.
For the book purists, for the Peter Jackson fans that are married to the films, what message do you have for them as they're awaiting the premiere of the series?
I would say, come along for the ride.
But what do we learn about woman dwarves that we didn't know through your portrayal?
Well, we learned that they exist. This is necessary. This is a revolutionary moment within our time, and to be the poster child of accessibility for people of colour, for women.
This is the first time that we see a woman, and the first time that we see a black woman in this area and this world and these works of Tolkien. You know, this is necessary.
Diversity is our strength.
And one more question: what does it mean to be a woman in film?
It means it's really hard. And if you're a woman of color, then it's really, really hard.
Am I saying that I hate white dudes? No, I'm not. But what I am saying is that if you make a movie that is a love letter to women of color, there is an insanely low chance a woman of color will have the chance to see your movie and review your movie.
Diversity is our strength.
And I'm also saying I don't hate white dudes. I'm just saying we need to be conscious of our bias and do our part to make sure that everyone is in the room.
Diversity is our strength.
I do not need a 40-year-old white dude to tell me what didn't work for him about A Wrinkle in Time. It wasn't made for him.
Diversity is our strength.
Hi, I'm Officer Lutz with the Columbus Division of Police. I'm your LGBTQIA+ liaison officer. And we're unveiling right now our Pride Cruiser for the month of June.
Sexism in gaming.
Hey guys, let's talk gender, specifically Libra genders. Firstly, know the difference between a static or a stable gender, one that doesn't change, and a fluid gender, one that does change. Now, Libra genders. Libra gender people...
I think it's time for another adult pre-K lesson. What do you think? All right, turn your listening ears on. Zoop, catch a bubble in your mouth. Good job. Okay, here's the thing. Having a preference is something like, I'm looking for a partner who likes kayaking, or wakes up early in the morning, or loves pizza. But when your preferences exclude an entire group of marginalized people, that's problematic. Okay, that's not nice. That's not a preference. If you lump all fat people in one group together as though they are not very different individuals, that's fatphobic. Just like lumping all black people in one group and saying, I don't like black people is racist. And lumping all disabled people in one group and saying, I don't think people in wheelchairs are hot is ableist. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Who the fuck starts a conversation like that? I just sat down.
People have been messing with me my whole life. I learned a long time ago that there's no sense getting all riled up every time a bunch of idiots give you a hard time. In the end, the universe tends to unfold as it should.
Aside from the fact that the 2018 film is a rehash of the original film with Michael escaping and returning to Haddonfield, the atmosphere of modern-day culture takes me out of the film a bit. With some moments, it feels like a Carpenter film, and other scenes feels like a product of the times. With that said, let's move on to the look of Michael. I think Rob Zombie's film had a good amount of influence on the look of Michael's mask in this film. I actually really like the withered look of it. It shows the passage of time and updates the classic style. I do find it funny that Michael chooses another boiler suit. As far as the performance goes, James Jude Courtney does pretty well. He has good body movement, and he brings some of that Rob Zombie's Jake Myers brutality. It's a decent blend. But that said, there's one big question that still lingers. Is Michael supernatural, or just an ordinary human? Well, this film doesn't really answer it. Hell, I can't even say that the next film gives us a definitive answer. But we'll save that for next week's review. If I were to give a numerical rating from 1 to 10 on this film, I'd give it about a 5 out of 10. Like Star Wars The Force Awakens, Halloween 2018 follows similar beats to the original and doesn't do too much new. Oh, except for this little twist that amounts to nothing. I'm sorry, what was the point in making this little chubby man put on the Myers mask? I'm not gonna lie, when I first seen this movie in theaters, I actually thought Michael was dead for a moment, and they were gonna use Dr. Zartane of all people as the killer. Dear Lord, I can only imagine the backlash. Well, that's Halloween 2018. Stay tuned for...
Emerge! He is an apex predator. When he surfaces, there will be no pause. There will be no empathy. This ends when Michael is dead! Evil dies tonight!
Oh, god damn it!
Evil dies tonight! Right. Evil dies tonight! Evil dies tonight! Right. Shit. Evil dies tonight!
Fuck off, film. Dear God, I swear it has to be one of the most overhyped and overused pieces of cinema marketing we've seen in the last decade. And let's be honest here, people, we knew evil wouldn't die this night. I mean, considering we knew this set of Blumhouse films were going to encompass a trilogy, what was the expectation going in? Obviously, they weren't going to pull another Dr. Zartane twist, and by the end of this film, the only thing dying tonight was a bunch of idiots wielding assorted household items as weapons that amounted to being as effective as a gender studies student calling you a bigot for not supporting the current thing. But let's save that mess of a scene for later and get on to this review. Halloween Kills. Well, I guess it's better than Halloween for the third time. So, because the previous film was average at best, you could say I didn't put a lot of expectations on this sequel. And being that they rebooted this franchise for the fourth time in the past 40 years, I was at a point where I came to terms with the realization that we would never get that same lightning in a bottle like we did with the original Carpenter film. The film was simplistic and wasn't dependent on sequels to carry the story forward. With that said, how does Halloween Kills stack up to the other sequels in the franchise? Well, I'd say it's a combination of all the sequels we've got so far. Call it a Halloween greatest hits film if you'd like. Is that a good thing? Not really. On the one hand, seeing familiar elements has its place. At the same time, when you've seen the same movie 10 times with different strokes of paint, the feeling of oversaturation and franchise fatigue begins to set in. That's why it's so important that there are different genres in the entertainment industry. If we kept getting the same shit over and over non-stop, people will begin to lose that feeling of wonder they receive when watching their favorite film. It's one of the biggest reasons I'm not a fan of most of the Halloween sequels. At the same time, you have films that do a complete 180, and they feel unrecognizable in their own franchise. And that can be an accurate summary of my problems with this film. It utilizes familiar elements like we've seen in previous films, and at the same time adds things that feel misplaced. First, let's cover the story here. Yeah. So as a base foundation, the movie picks up where the last one left off. The Strode women are in the back of a truck getting away from the raging inferno that they left Michael in. We get a lengthy flashback scene explaining how Michael got caught in 1978. We get reintroduced to a handful of legacy characters from the first film. Oh shit. I don't like where this is going.
I'll see you in hell.
This flashback sequence has been receiving a lot of praise. Many have complimented on the quality of the scenes and how it recaptured the look and feel of the 78 film. And to a certain degree, I will acknowledge the positive elements of this sequence. I find the effects used to recreate Dr. Loomis to be some of the best practical effects used for this endeavor. This use of makeup, lighting, and getting an actor that resembles Donna Pleasance should send a message that the old school movie magic still works, and in most cases, I would prefer they used it that way. Hell, this work here looks a hell of a lot better than the digital stuff we've received in recent years. Another aspect I thought was well done was the Myers mask. It looks so clean and pristine. The mask makers did a fantastic job. Now, as for the context of the scene, my feelings are very mixed. For the purposes of the narrative the filmmakers were trying to tell, I suppose it makes some sense for the detailed introduction of the character Lonnie. He was a minor character in the first film, and now they've brought him back for this film. Another character whose relevance and character arc is tied to this flashback is Officer Hawkins. Honestly, I thought his character was dead in the previous film. I mean, who the hell survives getting stabbed in the throat and getting ran over by a police SUV? Who knows and who cares, because he's on a mission.
We're on a mission from God.
He needs to die. And I'm the one that's gonna get him.
Yeah, like he's gonna kill Michael Myers. And speaking of returning characters and death, look what the filmmakers decided to do again. They decided to kill not one, but 4 legacy characters. Nurse Chambers, again. Tommy Doyle.
Fuck off, film.
Lonnie, as if that's any surprise. And Sheriff Brackett. For what? Look, I can understand the viewpoint that some fans would give, which is that their deaths were necessary to hit the point home that Michael is not to be taken lightly. That their deaths are raising the stakes. My response?
No shit.
I think the previous film hit that point very well that Michael is a serious threat, especially considering how many people he has killed in the past 48 hours. I really hate that they did this BS again, and I guess they didn't learn their lesson from Halloween Resurrection. With that out of the way, let's touch on another issue I have with this film. Ever since Star Wars The Last Jedi, I've had a big problem with movie sequels that take place on the same day or night as the previous film. One of the reasons is because there's very little room for character development from film to film. I personally like to see characters grow as the movies go on. I don't have an issue when TV shows do this as they are inevitably designed this way. Plus, going from one episode to another in the same season usually doesn't take 3+ years to make. Having a sequel take place directly after the previous film doesn't always work out, and for me, this is where the story takes a beating. Speaking of story, where exactly is it going? I feel like the story took a back seat and the main spectacle was the kills. When I walked out of the theater, I was genuinely confused as to what the story was trying to convey. It didn't help that we got this bullshit side plot involving the second mental patient that escaped the bus with Michael. Apparently, that side plot was some kind of allegory for what fear and mob mentality can do to people. It was also supposedly a reference to the January 6th incident in America, which has been overhyped and equated to 9/11. Now, fortunately, there wasn't any direct references to that event or any political figures, and you guys already know I hate seeing this crap in my entertainment if you've watched The War in Pop Culture. With that said, let's get back to characters. Specifically, let's talk about what I consider to be one of the biggest wastes of runtime in this film. Big John and Little John. You know, as cringy and ridiculous as the White Trash Family and White Horse BS in the Rob Zombie films were, I'll take them over these morons any day. It's the one element of this film that completely takes me out. These two characters were given far too much focus, especially considering how irrelevant they are to the overall plot of the film. It just so happens they have taken residence in the old Myers house, and this amounts to pretty much nothing. It would have been interesting if their story about hearing the voice of Judith actually happened. Like, what if the ghost of Judith Myers haunted the house, and maybe it's one of the reasons Michael goes back there, and why people who stand in that exact spot where she died seem to go into a trance-like state. Once again, I seem to be giving interesting ideas that the filmmakers should have utilized themselves. And their names, Big John and Little John. I don't know why, but this sounds like a really cringy Danny McBride joke. Why is that? Oh.
What I should do should make you suck this gun like a and when it comes, it's gonna blow your brains all over the street. What the fuck?
Alright, it's time to talk about the main event, what one can consider to be the driving force in this trilogy. In my last review, I asked the question, is Michael supernatural in this trilogy, or is he human? In my response, I suggested that this film doesn't give a definitive answer. Let me explain the scene and we can go from there. Throughout the movie, a few characters talked about Michael and his influence or effect on the people of Haddonfield. The BS subplot featuring who Bacon Pew Pew described as a fat Three Stooges looking motherfucker suggested that Michael is turning good people into monsters like him. From a certain point of view, one could argue that in this way Michael is, say, immortal. It's the Jason Voorhees effect that Friday the 13th and New Beginning was trying to run with. The idea that someone can transcend their mortal existence and live on through others. Like, maybe Michael killing people inspires others to don a similar mask and outfit and continue to kill just like he did. Thus, Michael Myers is metaphorically immortal. And while this sounds interesting in theory, I don't really like the idea. Obviously, it didn't work with Jason and doesn't work with Michael. Aside from that idea that was being hinted at, the movie all but tells us Michael is supernatural. As Cameron and Allison are in the Myers house, Michael starts killing Cameron while Allison watches helplessly. And then he finishes Cameron off like this. As a quick side note, that death was brutal. At first, I wanted him to get taken out. He was such an ass in the previous film, and I thought he would get his eventually. Then the movie decides to have him redeem himself, and I mean, I guess what he did wasn't completely terrible, and if he was such a vile dude, he could have easily left Officer Hawkins to die in the street. But of course, he still pays a price with a neck break. As Michael goes in to kill Allison, Karen comes in, stabs Michael with a pitchfork, stomps the side of his face into the stairs, and baits him with his mask. I said it to my friends when I watched the trailer that people who touch Michael's mask like that tend to have a short lifespan, and I was right. More on that later. The chase ends in the middle of a road where Michael's mask is laying. As he approaches, he's suddenly surrounded by a handful of people wielding assorted weapons. A little fight ensues, Michael is shot several times, beaten down, and for a final blow, Karen stabs him with a knife. While this is happening, we get interwoven shots of Lori talking to Officer Hawkins about Michael. She says something about Michael not being human because of all the damage he's been dealt. She also talks about him transcending the more he kills. As the scene continues, Michael rises up, slitting the throat of Brackett, and a massacre ensues. Everyone present at the beatdown is killed swiftly, including Tommy. Okay, let's break this down a bit. First off, I hate how the filmmakers handled this scene. With the amount of people surrounding him, Michael should have been bomb rushed and beaten to a bloody pulp. When they shot Michael, and some other weapons of choice are kinda fucking ridiculous. I mean, Jesus Christ, what are you gonna do with that iron? Press Michael's clothes? If this scene was handled better, the reveal of Michael truly being supernatural could have been legendary. Something like the mob beats Michael to a point of broken bones and shoots him in the face several times, and he's just lying there. And as the people start walking away, we get the famous Michael Myers rising up motion, and then he starts killing everyone. With Michael taking this beating and all the damage he's taken, it should be obvious that he was supernatural. It's just, for me, the original film made it very clear that Michael was supernatural. This film is just retreading what we should already know. Anyways, as the movie comes to a close, we see Karen go up to that same spot we've seen previously, and as she stands there, Michael randomly pops out from behind and starts stabbing her like he killed Judith. Now, if you're watching the extended cut, you get a better ending where Laurie's calling Karen, Michael answers, and Laurie, recognizing his breathing, says this.
I'm coming for you, Michael.
And that's it. That's Halloween Kills. The best way to sum up this movie is in its title. Halloween Kills was all about the kills, and the story took a back seat. Let's just hope Halloween Ends gives a satisfying conclusion to the Michael Laurie plot. And even though it's called Halloween Ends, I highly doubt this will be the last we see of Michael Myers. If the past 40 years have taught us anything, it's that you can't kill the boogeyman. Well, here we are. Welcome to the final review of the HalloScream Review Series. Let's not waste any time and get straight into it. Oh, and spoilers. Big spoilers. So you got 5 seconds to make like my sweet dreams and flee from Carter Man's grand miracle. Okay then. Halloween Ends. Out of all the Halloween movies, I think I can say that this one felt closer to the original than any of the others. Will that mean this movie will get unanimous praise? No. With the direction this movie takes, hell no. Now, let me say this. I would say this movie is 60% solid. The other 40% hinders this movie greatly. More on why later. First off, let's get some of the big stuff out of the way. I'll start with where this movie picks up post-Halloween Kills. 1 year after Kills, Michael's been MIA. The people of Haddonfield have been severely affected by what Michael has done. People have killed or committed suicide. It's a plot point that Kills was trying to go with, that Michael's influence on people is making them become evil. The spirit of Michael Myers is corrupting Haddonfield for all intents and purposes. As a result of all the bad that's happened, people are on the edge. We get a voiceover and several shots of Laurie as she sees the carnage that has gripped the town. We then get introduced to Corey Cunningham. Cunningham, huh? Like the director of the first Friday the 13th, Sean Cunningham. So Corey's your typical nerdy dude who's doing a little babysitting for a kid that appears nice and innocent. Corey and the kid are watching John Carpenter's The Thing on TV, a nice reference to the original Halloween where everyone is watching The Thing from another world. As they talk, we find out that the kid Corey's babysitting is a complete shithead. I mean, he calls Corey ugly and friendless or some bullshit like that. Man, screw this little asshole. Send him into the sewers for Pennywise to fuck up. Anyways, as the scene goes on, the little shit decides to play a prank and lock Corey up in the attic room. He kept saying Michael Myers is going to get Corey, and Corey starts panicking and trying to bust down the door. While this is happening, the parents are getting home, and as they walk into the house, Corey gets free by busting down the door like Psycho Dad.
Give us like 10 seconds. You're not coming in here, the door's locked. Holy shit!
Unfortunately, or fortunately, if you think the little shit deserved it, by busting down the door, the kid gets hit in the face and falls off the balcony and splat, dead. Well, didn't see that coming. Long story short, Corey gets arrested and Haddonfield is yet again struck with another tragedy. The thing is, though, that this was an accident, aka not intentional. Skip ahead 3 years later, and we get the rest of the story. Laurie and Allison are living a normal life, Michael Myers has been at MIA for a total of 4 years now, and everything seems normal, all things considered. We get reintroduced to Corey, he's got a job at a junkyard site, and he ends up meeting Allison via Laurie's intervention. In the end, they start dating. He gets a new ride, and all seems decent. That is, until he runs across some jackass bully tropes who look like they just came straight from Rob Zombie's world. I mean, look at this asshole's haircut. As they have a little scuffle, Corey gets thrown over the bridge and dragged into the sewer. Jesus Christ, I don't know. It feels like we're starting to get a little It vibes, huh? And at this point, this is where people will start to have major problems if they don't already. Corey's wandering through this isolated section of the sewer and gets grabbed by, guess who? Michael Myers. And at this point, most of us already guess that this guy is dead. I mean, after all, anyone who comes across this bastard usually ends up dead anyway. But regardless, instead of killing him, Michael lets him live. And not only that, but lets him escape too. But something's different. When Michael grabbed Corey, they look into each other's eyes, and Corey begins seeing the night he killed that little shithead. As he gets out, it's almost as if a switch has been turned on. He goes from being a nice but troubled guy to a bad boy, Christine style. Another long story short, Corey begins helping Michael kill. So the Haddonfield boogeyman is back, and this time he's got a little helper in a scarecrow mask. This all escalates to the point where Michael and Laurie show down for the final time, and Laurie, with Allison's help, is victorious. They successfully kill the boogeyman by, bleeding him out. Yeah, okay, I know. What the fuck? But we'll talk about that logic later. For now, let's address one of the big elephants in the room and why people are not liking what this movie has done. Corey Cunningham. In the minds of some, Corey has taken the spotlight from Michael. Some are probably saying the movie puts too much focus on this kid and ruins the movie. So what are my thoughts? Well, I'm indifferent about it. Why and how? Well, entertain my perspective for it if you would, dear viewer. After going through this entire franchise, going from greatness to the ninth circle of giraffe hell, I've endured some of the biggest bullshit this franchise has to offer. I've already come to the conclusion that Halloween will never get to the greatness of the 78 film, so the movie focusing on Corey doesn't faze me like it would other people, i.e., I'm not really bothered by it. At the same time, it's actually not a terrible plot and character arc. In fact, I would say that it's one of the strongest aspects of this film. Seeing an innocent character go down this path was very interesting, and the filmmakers did a fantastic job with developing the character of Corey. My only critique is that this story is misplaced. Why? Well, this isn't an issue of the movie itself. More so, it's on the fault of the filmmakers. This story and Michael's return after those years should have been in the first movie. Put simply, Halloween Ends, and to be more specific, its story, should have been the start of the Blumhouse trilogy. Remember when I criticized the 2018 film for being a rehash of the 78 film? Well, I would say that Halloween Ends is how to do a Halloween movie that is similar to the 78 film right. The biggest thing aside from Laurie and Michael's story going for this film is the slower burn and showing a proper character arc. Why they didn't have a similar mindset for the overall trilogy, I have no idea. And I know that many people will not like how this movie put more focus on Corey, and believe me, I understand those feelings. Here's the problem. Halloween Kills was all about Michael. In fact, they hyped him up so much that there was nowhere else for him to go but down. The order of these movies are completely fucked up. Halloween Ends should have been the beginning, and Halloween Kills should have been the finale. I mean, Jesus Christ, they hyped up Evil Dies Tonight so much as if that was the conclusion of the story. And to the people that think the Corey story is so bad, look at the previous bullshit we got. The White Horse crap, the incest of Thorn, the entire existence of Halloween Resurrection. The Corey Cunningham story is not the weak link of Halloween Ends. How they handled Michael Myers is. The 60% of the film that's good lies with Corey's story and the story of Laurie and Allison. The 40% that shit lies with what they did and didn't do with Michael Myers, among other things. The story of Halloween always focused on Michael Myers and the shape. And because Blumhouse blew their proverbial load with the epicness, terror, and sheer strength of Michael in Halloween Kills, there was nothing left for him. Halloween Ends quite literally made him a weak old man who needed the help of a 20-something-year-old kid to kill people. Or, as Laurie said in Kills,
I always thought Michael Myers was flesh and blood, just like you and me. But a mortal man could not have survived what he's lived through. The more he kills, the more he transcends into something else impossible to defeat.
This is complete bullshit. Michael never needed help, and tying his powers in with when he kills is also bullshit. It's like if he doesn't kill, he loses his power. This is almost Cult of Thorn bad. And what's worse is that they don't explain that Michael's supernatural. Instead of being blunt and honest, they beat around the bush and Michael dies in a pathetic way. Now look, I'm not asking for an epic Lord of the Rings Sauron death here. I just feel that if Michael is supernatural, give him a more fitting death. Because let's be honest here, people, Michael has endured too much damage already to be killed by losing blood via a throat and wrist slit. At least Halloween 2 had a more legendary death. I'm less mad about Corey and more mad about Michael's treatment. I think I can say that this movie overall is well done. It's not a shitfest like Resurrection, and it's slightly better than most of the sequels we've received. The only thing holding it back is how they handled Michael. And that's something I want to touch on again. More specifically, how I would have handled Michael and his death. Recall my little fan theory about Michael Myers from the original film in my Rob Zombie Halloween 2 review. To put it in a simple format, I think that Michael Myers in John Carpenter's Halloween is possessed by an evil spirit or demon. Now, don't get this confused with Halloween 6's explanation, however similar it may seem. Like the movie itself, my idea is simple. At some point before Halloween night 1963, the little child known as Michael Myers was taken over by a demon. This demon, being in control of Michael, killed Judith, and after it was done, it relinquished control of Michael for the time being. Michael, being fully conscious about what had taken place, runs out of the house. When his parents arrive and take the mask off, we see Michael's in a state of shock. It's the kind of face one makes when they witness something terrible. Being put in a state of shock as a result of killing his own sister, he retreats into himself. He doesn't speak, nor does he do anything resembling life. He merely exists as a physical being occupying a space. It is because of this absence of consciousness that the demon that overtook him is now in full control. Michael Myers is merely a passenger in his own body. In an effort to reach the boy inside, Dr. Samuel Loomis is assigned to oversee the boy. As the years go by, Dr. Loomis begins to realize that a human being is not occupying the body he sees before him. He doesn't know exactly what it is, and in a way the details of what it is doesn't matter. All Dr. Loomis knows is that what is lying behind the face of this human being is purely and simply evil. Something dark and malevolent is inside of this boy, and he must never get back to the world as only carnage would lay in his wake. Come the night before Halloween 1978, the shape escapes its prison and seeks to go back to familiar territory, to the place where it first unleashed its unholy power. If Michael Myers, the human, has been possessed by the demon we will refer to as the Shape, then it's safe to say that Halloween Ends' line of evil doesn't die but changes shape would fit almost perfectly with my little theory. To put it in the context of the ending to Halloween Ends, have Michael's body be completely destroyed, then show someone like, say, Corey pick up the Myers mask, and thus the shape lives on. The only problem is that people would be very upset that we would be leaving Michael Myers behind. And to a certain extent, I understand this feeling. I mean, we've been following Michael for so long, and let's be honest, hearing about a mass killer named Corey Cunningham doesn't quite have a ring that Michael Myers does. Based on all the time we spent with Corey and Allison, I can't help but think that Blumhouse was trying to leave the door open for more Halloween sequels that would focus on Corey and Allison, while putting Michael and Laurie's story back on the shelf. Could it have worked? Possibly. My friend and fellow YouTuber and Patreon supporter Kyle from Return of the Living Flet even said that Ends felt more like an anthology film rather than a direct Halloween film. Overall, I think that if Michael was handled better and if they didn't kill off Corey, Halloween might have continued. It probably could have worked with an anthology angle and then eventually return to Corey and Allison's story with the overall villain still being the Shape. And who knows, maybe in 10 years we'll see the Shape again. Because if my little theory has any validity as Halloween Ends itself has left as a possibility, it could happen. Okay, so I want to address the different camps that feel what they feel about Halloween Ends and give my final thoughts. To start off, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from Chris Snyder's review on Letterboxd. Make sure to check out his review when you get a chance. And a thank you to Chris for allowing me to use some of his review. So how does the final movie of the David Gordon Green H40 trilogy land for me personally? I love the shit out of this movie. It's not perfect, there are definitely things I would have done differently, but this was so refreshing for me. I'm a huge fan of Halloween 2018. Not the biggest fan of Halloween Kills, but this could not be more different than the previous two movies. And that's what I love most about it. I completely understand how fans will be pissed off and hate this movie for taking a new direction. But this is the 13th film in the franchise. How many times do you want the same thing over and over again? And I will say this, as a final film in the trilogy, it's out of place. It doesn't fit with the previous two much at all. However, as a standalone Halloween movie, I think it was great and so much fun. Respect to Blumhouse and David Gordon Green and company for having the balls enough to go this way. So, Chris is of the camp that Corey's story is good. He enjoyed that aspect and, like me, acknowledged that not everyone will like that the story has Corey at center focus, all things considered. He also thinks the story is misplaced in this trilogy, and this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about Kyle's thoughts. Because this movie doesn't directly focus on Myers as much as the previous film in the trilogy, it feels a little disconnected. Obviously, this is in the same universe as Michael Myers. With that said, the movie feels more standalone than a sequel. Is this a good thing? Well, yes and no. On one hand, having Halloween go to the anthology route is something they should have done after the first movie, while at the same time keeping each new story in the same universe as the original Michael Myers story. Had it been done successfully and having a sparing use of Michael, Halloween as a franchise could have been a very successful juggernaut of a horror franchise. At the same time, because this movie put less focus on Michael and more on a new character thanks to Halloween Kills, I feel like this is going to be Halloween 3 Season of the Witch all over again. Both Ends and Season of the Witch went down a different route that was a fairly sizable step away from the norm. Both stories were simple, yet still entertaining enough that people acknowledged the film's values. And both have split the fan base a significant amount. Though if Michael was handled better in this movie, I think the split would be reduced by a good amount. Now, let's take a look at the other side. Specifically, those who did not like it. From what I could find, one of the biggest issues aside from how they use Michael is Corey and the movie's focus on him. After watching Ends for the first time, the first thought that ran through my head was that people will not like that he gets so much attention and how it's basically his movie. For me, I just don't care at this point. After going through the Thorn trilogy, Resurrection, and Jake Myers, I just don't have the energy to be pissed off anymore. On one hand, I completely understand why people would be upset. I would be too if I had more investment in this trilogy. The thing is that the Blumhouse trilogy screwed up from the start. The 2018 film was the Force Awakens of this trilogy. It did nothing new and rehashed the same basic plot of the original. Halloween Kills decided to take a page from Rob Zombie's book and focus heavily on seeing Michael in full view and racking up a body count like he's goddamn Jason Voorhees. Halloween Ends tried to go back to fundamentals and tell a full story in detail, but will likely fail to capture audiences, at least for now. Give it a good 10 years, and you might see more fans give it a chance. As I said earlier, my perspective on the Corey story is that it was misplaced. The movie felt like a Halloween film at certain points, aside from some stupid stuff. With that said, seeing Corey's accident and his descent into darkness felt similar enough to Michael in the first film, albeit with extra details and a more tragic villain angle rather than evil incarnate. Alright, let's get into some more issues I have with this movie. These problems range from bad storytelling to poor decision making on behalf of the filmmakers. To start off, trying to make Michael's influence on the people of Haddonfield cause them to do bad things is flawed, at least with the way they told it. This issue also ties in with an even bigger problem that affects the whole film and story that they've been trying to tell in this trilogy. The filmmakers try to tie Michael's influence with evil and how it's like a force of nature, words that John Carpenter himself used to describe Michael in the original film. Here's my issue. They took who was supposed to be evil incarnate and treated him like a plague bringer, that Michael could infect anybody he touches. Now, while this idea does sound interesting, it just doesn't fit with Michael, and it doesn't fit with Halloween. Halloween was very personal and specific with one evil individual. The story in the original never suggested that Michael killing people would influence others to do the same and therefore spread evil like a disease. It was always one man, one boogeyman, if you will. Adding on to that is the subject of Michael being supernatural. So, is he supernatural? Who knows and who cares, because Michael gets killed anyway. But he doesn't die by some spell or getting stabbed by the Kandarian dagger. They just bleed him out like a stuffed pig, and then for good measure have a public gathering with his body getting destroyed at the junkyard. And for all intents and purposes, that's the end of the story. There's no explanation of how he's able to survive the amount of damage he took. They just brush it under the rug and say it's over. And from that angle, I can absolutely understand why people hate this film. They don't focus on Michael enough, and when they do, it's executed with the finesse of Amazon trying to update Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy for a modern audience. And this isn't even including the bullshit logic of the townspeople blaming Laurie Strode for Michael coming back to Haddonfield, despite having public information to the contrary, these characters even existing, this character's lousy aim, the fact that Corey can somehow survive at least 2 point-blank shots from a revolver, fall off the second floor of a house, stabbing his own throat, and once again, this asshole's haircut. So, would I recommend watching Halloween Ends? Well, it depends on you, the viewer. If you had an investment in this trilogy and want to see how the story ends, sure, knock yourself out. If you're a hardcore Myers fan like me, you may want to skip out just because of how they treat Michael in this film. If you're a casual horror fan who doesn't give a shit about Michael Myers and Halloween, you might find this one to be boring and less gory and intense compared to most shitty horror films these days. For me, I'm indifferent. On one hand, this movie had some strong points that I did enjoy. On the other hand, this film's treatment of Michael and a personally unsatisfying ending takes me out. Maybe I set myself up for failure by expecting Blumhouse to utilize Michael's supernatural background that they threw in our faces in Halloween Kills. If they utilized my theory of Michael being possessed by the shape, a demon, the story could have continued with Corey and Allison. But unfortunately, like before in the history of this franchise, they pissed away another great opportunity. Maybe in 10 years we will see the shape return. Until then, let him rest. He's earned it after this mediocre trilogy. And let's see Jason Voorhees come back already, goddammit.
Yeah, 'cause he's back. He's the man behind the mask.
Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. The final review of the HalloScream Review Series. It's been one hell of a ride. And although I don't really appreciate the Halloween sequels as much as I used to, the bright side is that it all enhanced my enjoyment of the original that much more. And in my mind, Michael Myers was never caught in 1978. Which means he's still out there. Somewhere.
Yeah, well, she can wait. Hold on a second. I'll get your fucking pony shit later, you little furry bastard. Well, tell her I'm gonna be a little late. Alright? Alright, thank you, stupid bastard. Alright, you. Let...
Fucking white trash son of a snowblower. Wolverine better find my pony shit.
I'm Special Agent Carter Sauce.
Special Agent Dr. Richtofen.
And until next time, fellow investigators, remember
the entertainment
is out there.
is out there.